some kind of association that NASA was a good investment because you invest in the space program, it has the offshoot benefits to the civilian sector. You know, all the other industries benefit from it.
Which is, I've tried to use the argument with friends before of, yeah, the investment of when you get past the no, NASA's not being canceled, and they come back going, we're in the worst economic crisis since forever I've been born, and they freak out about it and go, well, they haven't done anything either since Apollo, or I remember seeing the shuttle in the 80s. You guys are still flying that thing? They're like, I want to get in my car and it's 9 years old. What are you talking about?
On the side to that, have you had anybody run across within the NASA community the attitude that it was too early to or the point of view that it's too early to retire the shuttle? It really has plenty of life in it. I think that maybe. And then when you look at the B-52, it was been upgraded for decades. Mm-hmm. Why couldn't we have done the same thing with Charlotte? Well,
we did.
Yes, but it doesn't meet the needs of our future programs.
No.
Going to the moon and Mars. And such.
I tell when people say like, why don't we just keep doing it? I go, well, you know, when you were 20, did you go and buy the first car you go buy was a big minivan so you can haul around your kids with the wife you didn't have? Yeah. No. Over 20 or 30 years, what you needed something to do changed.
It needs change, yes.
We don't get one car for your lifetime. Mm-hmm. We get a car as the needs evolve. We're like, oh, you're a college kid, you probably got a 2-door sports car or something, and then you're like, now I'm going to get a sedan, I'm working, and then I got a wife and kids, we're going to get the minivan, got all their stuff in the back. You know, the kids go away, maybe I go back to the sedan. You go through life. To say, when NASA was, you know, relatively a teenager in like the 80s, not really so sure, but I'm all gung-ho I can do it after I just showed and I just graduated high school, I'm amazing with the Apollo stuff. And then just kind of going, okay, now we don't really know what we're doing, but we're still going around in our old clunker.
And can you afford to keep more than one vehicle running at the same time? Does it make sense?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think
you want to get rid of the old one while you take the new one.
But I mean, just from a public perception point of view, I think the shuttle is very iconic, and very recognizable as NASA, like, as a symbol of NASA. And if that's going away, and there's nothing really to replace it, even though NASA's doing lots of cool stuff everywhere. The fact that there's not that sort of centralized symbol in the public's mind.
The public being civil-minded that they fixate the shuttle.
Right. Well, I mean, it's so visually memorable.
I mean, I do know people that go and say, well, I think NASA should be done because if all they can do is replace this amazing thing that's a space shuttle with an Apollo thing, and then they don't know anything.
Well, yeah, anymore. I mean, like it's a lot harder to tell the difference between two different types of rockets than it is a rocket and the shuttle.
I mean, it's a progression thing that people have. You think bigger, you think more, you think essentially a futuristic. People have a perception of that.
Progress means
and
bigger.
They feel that you've gone around the curve and started going back. And I think even in the original design meetings, that should have been thought of. It might not be a design point, but it's something that
perception.
On day one when you sketch the thing, you go to drive your PAO officer and be like, you have a 3-year heads up on this. Figure this out. We're going in this direction. You can't just go, I don't know what to say when you show this thing.
So it's the story? Is it the story that we've got wrong with this? I mean, that we've fixated on making NASA, and somebody said it doesn't do one thing, it does many things, but the thing people know it for are the things that we are about to not have anymore.
Right.
And so that's like, we're getting rid of the mascot.
Yeah.
And people don't know that the team plays football anymore. They just know the mascot. You know. So is that appropriate? Did the story get told the right way? If all people know is the mascot and not that the team even plays a sport, much less that they play 10 sports and are good at them all.
Yeah,
all they know is the mascot.
Everyone put their team, like all the money into the star player. It got you through this far. Eventually, that person has to retire.
Yeah, the shuttle is.
They're going to age out, and everyone's like, "Oh man, why would I stick around?" I think there's some other stuff I've heard of. Maybe I have no idea what it is, and I don't think they're very good. And I think NASA has done a poor job in characterizing all of what it does. Of course, you can have this highlight thing, and you should, but you need the base and support from everything else. So whenever you have a gap or a downtime, it doesn't seem like you've done nothing. I knew people that said after Columbia, they're like, I thought NASA just shut down for like 3 years.
So yeah, so
like, they're like, oh yeah, I knew they were investigating what went wrong. They had no clue that any other type of work happened on any other project anywhere else. They're like, I thought NASA just shut down. Period. You're like, what? Okay.
I don't know about you, but
Wait, Jim's been trying to.
Yeah.
well, I guess I'm just in a maybe a different sort of way trying to agree with you. Inside the Beltway, we recognize that what NASA is to the United States is the human spaceflight program. And the human spaceflight program has these lulls in it, especially when we have an accident, because then there's this whole return to flight thing. And but the icon of NASA, to use John's word, is the human spaceflight program, whether it's Apollo, whether it's the Saturn V, or the shuttle, or International Space Station to some other degree. Close second, but second place goes to like the Hubble Space Telescope. And then beyond that, one would assume, maybe the Mars rovers, And so the real question is, how do you get people to recognize that there is all this other stuff that goes on supporting NASA when there's a lull in the human spaceflight program? We're about to embark upon an age of a lull, right? We're going to shut the shuttle down. We don't have a replacement rocket. We've got the International Space Station flying, but our astronauts are getting there through either contracts with Russia or hopefully someday commercial crew contracts, right? But the question is, what do we do in the meantime so that people recognize that, where'd the sticky go? That, oh my God, we're not really shutting NASA down, right? And so in my division, I don't know if you heard my talk this morning or not, we've got this incredible sequence of things happening this year. And we've adopted internally the idea that we have to become the positive face of the agency while the human spaceflight program gets itself reorganized and put back together. So,
because I've heard from different friends that work in different sections of NASA doing aeronautics research or biomedical or something, and the view doesn't seem to even be on the internal of a supporting cast. It really seems like it's multiple little people going, well, maybe maybe if humans like space travel shuts down, then robotics will get some more money, or visuals get more money, or these people get. It's all about chasing what they want versus more of a collective team. Like if you're a second stringer on a basketball team and you sit on the bench for the first quarter and a half, your job is at the middle of the second quarter to get off the bench and play really, really well, so your starters can come back and win the game. If you don't play well, is your name on the marquee outside? No. But their names won't be there long too if you start playing bad.
So the other thing that's going on is, from my perspective anyway, is that the American people, and especially American politics, is extremely fickle. I mean, what would have happened after JFK made his challenge to get to the moon and return men safely by the end of the decade, if when Nixon took office, he said, no, we're not going to do that. And I think we get a lot of that these days. People, especially politicians, not even presidents, want to put their mark on the space program because it's recognizable. And they can say, well, my predecessor was an advocate of that, so I'm not going to be. I'm going to be an advocate of this, and we're going to stop doing that.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, even in robotic space flight, it takes more than one election period.
It takes more than one presidential cycle, even if they win both.
Yeah, to accomplish the sorts of things that we know.
Yeah, I think actually the long development cycle is going to be problematic no matter what NASA does ever. The fact that this is all long-term stuff, which, like, even if you're planning it perfectly, it's difficult for anyone in the public to remember or keep up with stuff over that long a period of time.
So that was one of the really interesting things, one of the experiments that NASA conducted in robotic spaceflight a while back. and it's a bad mantra, it left a bad taste in people's mouths. It was called faster, better, cheaper. But the idea was, if you did stuff faster, you could do it cheaper because you're just working on it for less time. But it also yielded, could have yielded results faster, so that the public would be less impatient.
Right. I think I've done stuff on like the faster, better, cheaper, and some stuff that works really well. But it also, those types of models, you have to get out there ahead of time going, we're going faster, better, cheaper. That includes more failures.
Right.
And it doesn't matter because if I fail once a year, because I'm trying to do something 4 times a year.
Yeah, so that worked really well until we started having the first set of failures. And then people started losing jobs over it.
Right.
Because the public still expects 100% success out of NASA.
Right.
Which is,
I mean, that's a whole nother.
Is that true though? I don't think that's true. I don't think the public expects 100% success out of everybody. I think that's a limitation that we self-impose because
I would
think
say
if
Congress. I'll correct
well,
myself.
I think it's a mismanagement of expectations on our end. I think that if we were more of a government in beta and people knew that there's some things, yeah, we can't fail. We're putting a robot on Mars, we can't fail. But for the 90% of everything else we do, like building the Nebula cloud computing platform, yeah, it's going to be in beta for 10 years. But that's okay, and we're willing to accept that risk because it's more of an experiment. And I think if we were more of an experimental culture, like we would be able to better manage those expectations.
I mean, that's what,
Well, I would agree.
Cooler
I do agree with that. And one of the
life.
things that we did on the Mars Phoenix landing was we said, we made it really clear to the public, you know, NASA's success rate of landing on Mars is only X%, you know, and in fact, the rest of the world has never done it, you know, and this is a really dangerous thing. But you know what? In our guts all along, we knew we were going to be successful, right? But it wasn't lying. We were setting the expectations to try and create the drama, create the interest level, so that when it touched down, even if it was a failure, we would have been a success.
Yeah. I mean, things like faster, better, cheaper are great models for some projects. To go out going, there's a 90% chance, and we know going into it, this is going to fail.
Right.
Our entire purpose was, you're like, why would you do a 2-year project to fail? You're like, because in the past 2 years, we just hired 10,000 new engineers out of our schools across the nation. They've never put anything in space. We gave our 2-year-old managers a team of 20 brand new out of school kids, and this entire team's under 25, and they're going to put something in orbit. And we gave them 2 years, $20 million bucks, and said, go for it. And if they make it, this is awesome. If not, they have 2 years experience, and we're putting them up the chain.
Putting something in orbit is very much different than putting someone in orbit, right?
But
you can't. You got to have
Right,
the
I
100%.
don't think anyone disagrees with that. I think it's just that we assume the same requirements as putting people to orbit for everything we do.
Yeah.
I mean, we just don't need to do
Same
that.
standard.
That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, you're like,
That makes
if all of my goal was, because then the goal of the project really actually wasn't even putting something in orbit, it was training my staff
Ah.
Yeah.
and giving them the experience. So when they see something or a glitch or design concept on paper when they're doing something for a manned mission, they actually have experience from something that they did, and it wasn't like, oh, I remember on this mission, because you can't have
And you
everything
learn
you
from
do
failures.
take decades.
Yeah.
You
And in
need-
that case, failure
you need to
is an
learn
option.
quickly, so I can go do a decade-long project.
Yeah.
I can't be like, well, I did. That means in a career you're only doing 1 or 2 projects. There is no other career field that lets you only learn twice.
Yeah.
You need to learn more than twice.
So you're saying that
Especially if
NASA
professional.
doesn't accept much risk because their only metric is they're looking for success,
Yeah.
mission success.
Mission success.
Right? They're not looking at how do we train people, somebody else can do that, or they can learn while they're working on a mission that succeeds.
Right.
Because obviously you learn the most by working on a mission that succeeds.
Yeah.
Well, you learn up from your failures, too, right?
Now there's, right, so the other side of that is that's absolutely stupid. You learn much more by failure than you do by success.
Actually, I would argue that the reason that NASA is so
Risk
dependent
averse?
upon success,
Yeah.
risk adverse, has more to do with sustaining itself. That in the event of a failure, we see entire programs shut down for years, and and funding levels begin to wane and drop as a result of multiple failures.
But do you think that's intrinsic in the failure, or is that a failure of
cultural
expectations?
Well,
you know what I mean? Like, does the Department of Defense do that same thing?
Well, they have DARPA.
You know, right?
They have DARPA, and the Department of Defense has the mantle of criticality to our very existence. You know, and so they have. You lose soldiers, it's a bad thing, but that's the way war happens, right? We're not supposed to lose astronauts, apparently. I don't know.
I mean, I don't want to argue the point of humanity or not, but I think NASA should take a look at all these core values that it says are values and just do the gut check and ask why is that? You're like, well, NASA's thing is never okay to lose an astronaut. Is that true? And be like, have the discussion. Or is it okay to have a mission failure on a robotic mission? And what is my acceptance of that? Oh, and then for all of these things, I should know exactly, I should be able to, like right now, look up online, if this mission fails, what will happen? Mm-hmm. It shouldn't be a surprise, be like, should we start an investigation board? Who should? I don't know. It should be like, if this failure occurs, this person's going to come in and start this and go through your management.
In fact, what a lot of people don't know is that for every robotic mission, that's actually the case.
Right.
Before we hold what's called a mission readiness briefing,
Right.
which is the final approval by the Science Directorate to launch, we actually have created a contingency plan. We know who's going to lead what investigation board.
I agree on the technical, but not as much on, you're saying, well, missions fail and people are afraid they're going to lose their job. Management should come up and say, before the mission starts, if this mission fails, you will not lose your job.
Oh, yeah.
Or should be honest enough to say, there is a chance that you will lose your job for this error. I think I would rather know as the engineer designing it what's going to happen.
But it's not just you. I mean, if there's people that are expecting to be doing the data analysis on your mission, you know, you're supposed to shoot a robotic mission up. It's going to beam back all this data. Somebody's got to sit there and parse it all and figure out what it means and do work on it. And you screw up a thruster, it goes off course and it blows up and kills the moon or something. You know, then it's not. You can always design, you know, start from scratch and say, well, I need to design a new spacecraft where I don't make that thruster mistake. I've learned my lesson. I'm going to go start doing that. But there had to be a whole chain of people on the operations side that were going to, or I don't know which side it actually is, but where they were going to be dealing with all that data. So then they are directly affected, and, you know, like there should be a whole company that just folds in.
So that in fact just happened last month. Yeah. We had a partnership with Japan, and we had scientists that we were funding to work with Japan on the data that would be coming back from the Venus climate orbit, which I don't know if you guys know, Japan went to insert it into orbit around Venus, and it had a problem with its propulsion system, shut down in the middle of the insertion burn, and missed Venus. Basically did not get captured into orbit. And what that means is, not only is it an embarrassment for Japan, and the engineers are all trying to figure out how to do it right the next time, but it means that the scientists that had planned their next 4 years of research and hired postdocs, you know, and grad students, now no longer have that opportunity.
Right.
So,
but did they plan for it?
No.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, I don't even. You know, I'm required in every business plan to put together what is the out clause?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, straight up be like, what am I going to get out?
Not to. Well, I want to go back to the point up on top. It says the public doesn't stay interested over long periods of time. What I'm going to say is fact, not my opinion. Because I did research and a master's degree in studies of the future, and it was the Future Space Program, and I started that in January of 1986. We had one class before Challenger. At any rate, in this program, I did research public opinion, and most of the public, they have too many things going on in their lives to be, they trust that someone else out there will make the decisions about the space program, so they don't get actively interested. I think Hubble was an amazing exception. And what did it do first? The images, I think, were aesthetically beautiful, which drew people in to then get interested in science. It wasn't the science first. I think it was the aesthetics.
I think it was also the human action of it messed up.
Yeah.
Well, wait.
Screw up was its biggest success.
Yeah.
Well, let's not complicate the issue. All right, let's just try to keep it. The public doesn't, because I did all this data research.
Well, I'm just putting down my notes. These are like my notes, but you guys all get to see.
Right. But what I want to say, so on that issue, because we're trying to also resolve a question.
A bigger
here.
question. Yeah.
Right. That's what I want to stick to. Is the bigger question. So, Hubble is an excellent example of something that we didn't plan to do, and it worked in amazing ways. So we have to keep that in mind, and that the public won't always be excited, but now we know it can be in some ways, okay? But it's not always. And also, I can go into a whole bunch of other...
Peaks and valleys.
Yeah, and there's a whole bunch of other issues beyond this. I'm trying to keep it really simple with a graph.
All right.
You finished?
Well, I was just going to say one more thing, because in the beginning, NASA did a lot of really, really good things that are not space-related. It actually funded research for sociology, which was the work I was actually doing, and it's actually foundational, very extremely important work in sociology. It had never been done, and it was funded by NASA. The other thing is the NASA art program, and I have the original book, Eyewitness to Space, with the plates, and they hired different artists to come in and watch the training and depict it. So NASA really saw that this is part of human history, and we need to record it in lots of different ways. Now, all that stuff went away, but those are things that were really good. NASA really, someone up there really had the right idea. So some of that needs to be really brought out again. So that's what I wanted to say.
All right, I just wanted to comment on both those points that's up there. It's that, well, first and foremost, like, we can't get our hopes too high on public numbers, because in terms of the space program, us getting to the moon and whatnot, you have to think about the time in which it was happening. First off, we were in a Cold War, and the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, and it also got Yuri, I forgot his last name. Gagarin up into space, and it was just like, yes, we got it up there. What did you guys do? So, and also, we had a president who was unfortunately assassinated say, we will get to the moon by the end of the decade, and with that and a war, it's supposed to arouse a big public support, because what really got us public to be interested in space was not the idea of exploration, but the idea of beating the Soviets. And
it was a supremacy thing. It wasn't an exploration thing. And I think you bring up a good point. A lot of people look back and say, "Oh, Kennedy was an explorer, and he pushed us to go into exploration." And I've heard a lot of the other side say, "No, he was looking at a way to beat the enemy without going onto the battlefield, and this was a way that they could demonstrate technical superiority that would indicate a battlefield's win without actually having to go through the process of building up the military and shooting each other." This was a chess match between opponents to determine whether or not they were going to have an actual battle. And I think a lot of people don't see it that way, and they do see it as a but this was about exploration, and for a lot of people I think it was that were working in NASA, but I don't know that that's the impetus, like you're saying, that wasn't society's reason for doing it. Mm-hmm. It may have been the people working on the program, their reason for doing it was they wanted to explore, but I don't think society supported them because they were looking for explorers.
Because that's the thing about society, if there's one thing, pretty much all societies, America included, we like both tragedies and we like winners. Even though tragedy is one of those things we're not too proud of, we will watch tragedies. I mean, it's just
can't peel your eyes away from a train wreck.
Yeah, and even more so, we love heroes because even though the Soviets beat us into space, we beat them to the moon, and that was huge public support because we America beat everybody else to the moon. So that's why I was thinking NASA can't get its hopes up that we will get those record TV ratings on
on such level as we did with the original man making it to the moon. But if possible, we might be able to kind of gear the public interest that way. It's a horrible way of doing it, but it is a good way to get public interest because just hear me out.
No, I'm not. I have other ideas going on in my head.
I heard from Neil deGrasse Tyson that China is beating us into space, and considering the public's current image with China, I don't want to. At the same time, it's kind of a hard thing to do because we don't want to put ill will on the Chinese itself because that could easily be misconstrued. But if we try to gear public support in that way, that might get us bigger numbers. It's a horrible thing to do, but I'm thinking.
Yeah. Okay, here's what I'm saying, that NASA at the beginning, and I'm not talking about the Apollo, I'm talking about the sociological, that they were really trying to get someone understood how important life is. I write my personal journals, because I understood early on. I'm just an ordinary human being, but I write it because at some point it's my personal perspective. But NASA understood that in its own sense by doing these different programs that most people don't know about, the sociology and the art which is out there. But what we need is a really foundational view. Kennedy did one thing for that period of time, but I don't think ever been done. Why do we have NASA? As a public, it has to be part of a foundation. Set a foundation that way you can build on, but we keep putting things that keep falling apart because it's not a firm foundation. We just do the one thing, and that's so. We have never really set down a vision. We could take. Kennedy was successful for a lot of different reasons, but if you just take it as a vision, here's what we're going to do. Here's the time period. But we take something as a vision. This is what we as a nation want to be. It's part of our core values. It's part of who we are. And the public doesn't have to be interested in everything. We don't have to do exciting things all the time. But to feel a part of it, like they did with Hubble, for people to come in and say, no, don't shut it down. No, that was significant. But a foundational view to include the public, but so people can see themselves in it and plan their own lives, whatever, if they're sewing a spacesuit or going out and getting food for the astronauts to live at, and when I say astronauts, I want to expand it. I want ordinary people to be able to see themselves as living and working outside the Earth's environment. Okay? Not specialized people, but that you need a broader spectrum. People do all sorts of bizarre things in bizarre environments. Underwater construction workers. Because that's an analogy. It's a space analog.
Right.
And that has been brought up. But anyway, that's to make it part of that and to use these different ways, these tools. Hubble worked. And then we've got the art program is still out there. They still do a lot of things, but we don't hear about it.
Voyager's still out there, and it's still making waves we don't know why.
Yeah.
Right.
I want to make sure I put down, are we canceling NASA? But I think you brought up a good point, which is that for most people, NASA and space are collapsed into one entity, and they think that NASA is space, and space is NASA. And they don't even realize that there are international agencies that also go to space and send people up. And they say, I actually had somebody say, I thought that the Russians didn't have spacecraft anymore because we beat them to the moon, so they stopped going. And I said, no, they're still flying, and they've been flying for the same amount of time we are, and they actually pioneered a lot of the stuff that we use, and now that we're ending our shuttle program and don't have a follow-on program ready, we're going to be flying with them. We're going to be taking the neighbor's car. It may be old, but at least it's still going, and what? No. Yeah. Go look it up on Wikipedia. It's there.
Actually, I think that the final point there, and something that Jim brought up about how people see the military and DARPA as necessary funding, and space exploration is not critical. But I think that goes for a lot of what NASA does. I think that I think that a lot of people don't think of sciencey things as necessary to fund. That's not. That it's something that's nice to spend money on, but it's not something necessary to spend money on.
For the same reason that we don't have a super collider,
Yeah,
Because we didn't want to spend money on it.
Yeah, that's.
So if you want to do high energy particle physics, you got to go to Europe.
Yeah,
and there are other examples of that too. We just don't want to.
Well,
Yeah,
and I heard Europe's having problems that CERN may not have enough money to run the collider
I
themselves.
hadn't heard that, but that would be ironic.
Who knows where?
In that
yeah.
sentence, though, I say it says space exploration is not seen as critical. To me, the issue I've had for a long time is just the words that NASA uses. When you ask someone what do they think of exploration, they don't think of exploration by definition is not a required element to staying status quo. You're like, why do I need? People are going, I can't afford my house. Why are we spending billions of dollars to go explore the stars? Isn't there enough here on the planet to explore?
Yeah.
Now, if you say not space exploration, but we're doing space expansion of our economic globe, then they're like,
where you can
let
get
me talk about this.
Yeah.
Or you can get a job. This will create jobs for you and
Like,
places
you're not
for
really-
good work.
You mentioned a foundation, and I'm wondering if one possible foundation with high drama would be fear of meteor strikes. Preparation, expansion into the solar system
I did think of that.
I tell you what, if there was
that-
an asteroid coming to Earth, NASA would get a lot more funding.
Yes. No, I see when you just said fear, but when you put the rest of
Drama
it, yes,
and
that has occurred to me.
danger.
That would, hey, we need to preserve the human race, and I don't want to make this as the foundation, but I think it's one way of looking at it, because if we want to preserve, we need to be expanding out, but also there are jobs there. People need jobs, homes. I mean, what did we do with the pioneers? And exploration has always been. I mean, I've been doing research on Columbus and exploration. Same issues.
Right, Lewis and Clark too.
Yes, same issues.
So my only issue with the safety, and I think you're absolutely right. I think most people don't have the broader view of the universe, and that there are always things out there that are trying to kill us, and we just get lucky a lot. It's like driving blind down the street, and so far we haven't happened to hit anything. That doesn't mean that there aren't things there. We just haven't happened to hit many of them lately.
Yeah, but you can't.
Or whatever you think about it, 2012.
It's just where people don't really understand what they're doing. They say, I've been driving along for 10 years and I haven't hit anything.
Right. You know that on Tuesday night, last Tuesday night, there was an asteroid that passed between the Earth and the Moon.
Was that the car size?
Holy crap, no,
it was small. It was only 2 meters. But
still awesome.
But it happens all the time.
That's
right.
Yeah.
And it shows up on Twitter, by the way.
That's what I found out about it.
Yeah.
But the safety concern is you have to have a continuous threat, and if science
I
fiction
don't
television
want that.
has told us anything, it's that you keep having to escalate.
I don't want it that way.
Once we get an Earth asteroid detection system up and running, then people will go. So
Yeah.
now we can stop, right? No, because there's a black hole headed this way. We have to figure out how
well,
to
that's what
stop
I'm
it.
saying. Talking about ordinary people want jobs, and how do you create jobs? Where do you create jobs? If you have people going to different planets or exploring,
Yeah, I mean,
and I don't mean
I think,
exploring in a
looking at
sense. I mean
economics,
pioneers.
technology
We've gone through this. I mean, I've seen 20-something years now.
You can say we have a job. You can have a job if you're alive.
Yeah, well, there's that piece of
it's
it.
commercial.
Commercially. In the beginning, very much the cowboy attitude, and we were going to do whatever it took to beat the Russians to the moon. But the Soviets, I'm sorry, to beat the Soviets to the moon. But as time goes by, more and more bureaucracy, more and more red tape. The NASA of today, SpaceX, what the public perceives is not the same company that took us to the moon. And risks that we were willing to take back then are unacceptable now. And the public, I think, tends to think that they have. Well, they do. They very much influence what we are willing to do. Do in terms of risks, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I did a whole.
I don't know that I agree with that.
I think there's some risks of like if I was willing to tell you could keep the entire program going, but and so I'm going to save you $10 billion a year on NASA, and you're going to get to the moon in 5 years. But I can tell you right now, 30 of your astronauts are going to die.
Or they're not going to come back.
If I tell you that straight up, I'd be like, I'm going to be
Was that
ahead of
acceptable?
schedule, under budget, but I'm not going to tell you is that 30 of 1,000, 30 of 1,000,000. I don't know.
Think of the Oregon Trail, for goodness sakes. Like,
Yeah.
you kill people along the way, but you're exploring,
You're looking for jobs, you're looking for new
was,
places to live.
That was an Oregon Trail when there was barely even a printed newspaper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right,
And
but-
unfortunately today, you could take a Twitter feed along to the astronaut, with the astronaut on a one-way trip to the moon, and people would be horrified as he twittered his last breath. And so I struggle with the technological age and the unacceptability of losing a human being at all. And I know there are astronauts out there that would volunteer for a one-way trip in a heartbeat. But I don't know that the public would accept that.
What's the difference between these days and the people that were involved in settling and moving out? Why did they take the risk they did? Why wouldn't we take it now? They're very different sociology than I guess.
I don't know that the people today wouldn't take those risks. I think the same people who would take those risks are still around.
Yeah.
I just think there's less
We can't get there.
societal acceptance
Right,
of
the people
taking
are
those
willing
risks.
to take the risk, but the people that are in charge of the pocketbook listen to the public that say they are not willing to pay for that risk.
And see, I think that's an almost a negative feedback loop that we've got going, is that NASA went to this faster, better, cheaper, but it still had kept that Apollo 13 movie, not Apollo 13 reality, Apollo 13 movie mantra of failure is not an option, which was a great tagline to get a team inspired to work innovative solutions to seemingly insolvable problems to get people home. But as a continuing mantra for a technology development agency, I think it's left them with no options for actual exploration or risk. Because what they put out is, we're NASA, we do no wrong. We can't have a mission failure because that would be a failure. We can't have somebody die because that's a failure. And if something happens, it's not our fault. Either a contractor did something wrong, or a process was wrong, or somebody, it's not us.
Blame.
And I think that if NASA could give up the failure is not an option and say failure is necessary to move forward, failure is mandatory in exploration. But again, you said we need a foundation of what is NASA here for? Are they here for space operations where we want it to be routine and safe?
Are they here for the public? Are they part of
radically
our...
different than saying that we want an exploration agency that goes out and does things. Do we want to just observe what's going on in the universe? Do we want to interact with what's going on in the universe? And I think that's where we don't have a good, in my mind, we don't have a good determination of where NASA fits in that and where we want our space program to be. And that's what the problem comes down to is, if you're going to go out and explore, you have to be able to take risks. And if you're going to sit here and say that space exploration is routine, then you don't need to take risks and you want to make it as safe as possible. So which...
Right. Well, we have commercial aircraft. I mean, we don't have a few people flying across the country or around the world. We have thousands and thousands. So we developed the technology where ordinary people can go to different places, and there are accidents and people die. But it's considered an essential part of our culture, because we need to travel. We need to get places, and it is the fastest. I mean, it's really, if you look at the statistics, it's safer.
Well, yeah.
Cars. Oh my God! You walk or take a car.
Yeah, cars. I think
So
maybe even better examples.
But the public's relationship to those technologies is different, because space exploration is separate. They can't get. How do I get it to be an astronaut? I have to be an astronaut. I have to have a special. Only a few get to go. And I don't have the ability to do that. I mean, do you have to know how to fly an airplane to go on a commercial aircraft to go anywhere?
The airline industry has worked really hard
to
keep that perception.
Right, but we're working on the commercial aspect of space
But even like
exploration, too.
cars are incredibly deadly all over the country all year long.
Horrifically deadly every day.
And people have no problem getting in their car and driving places.
But why is that?
There's an acceptable perceived level of risk from a vehicle that I have, I have personal control over my vehicle. I'm okay with taking personal responsibility for my own safety. And then when you're on an aircraft, you have to give up that responsibility to a pilot. And then when you're dealing with spacecraft, you give up someone else's life to the responsibility of a team of thousands of people that have put their spacecraft together. You know, I mean, it's like you're distancing the person that can make a difference from the people that it'll make a difference for. And maybe there's something to be dealt with there, but it seems like if we're going to be explorers and go out, NASA may need to rebrand what they do as, hey, here's how it works. Go play Oregon Trail.
There's one other aspect, just kind of butting in with all this. And I had this conversation with a few of the folks, and I'm an MODer. I work in mission operations down the road here, and there is that's part of the culture that people coming from the Northeast, not from the Houston area. When I thought of NASA, I thought of mission control, and I thought of Hubble. That was kind of it. And I knew there were satellites. Now, when I'm here, I can see here is very human spaceflight. And when you're inside the center, there's this, okay, this place is just human spaceflight, and mission control, failure is not an option. When you're sitting in the seat, you know you have 6 people up in space and there's a failure, yeah, failure is not an option, you got to save lives. But then outside of that room, outside of Building 30, we have to take risks, and our management, our culture within that one directorate is set up such that we are not taking those risks because we have been told failure is not an option. Now, there are other directorates within the center here, and there are other directorates within centers, other places that do take risks. And they do want to explore, and they do want to do things. So it's up to the higher level management, in my opinion, to say, okay, yeah, in some things when there's humans involved and something hits the fan, yeah, we got to do what we need to do to keep those people safe. That's that job. But when you're talking about exploring, being innovative, bringing in new ideas, doing something new, you have to take risks. So it's partly a culture change, more so on some organizations, on some mindsets than others. And that's causing a rift because then you're like, hey, operations people, we want to help you understand how we train astronauts. The other people are like, hey, that's great, then we can integrate these things in and have really cool heads-up displays, and so the crew members just looked at something and all the malfunctions are solved, so that way we have a better understanding. Cool. And then they start working together, and these guys say, well, you got to think through failure steep. You got to you don't want to take any risks with this. And these people are going, how many lines of code that is? That's completely different than what we're talking about. So there's a culture change. We need people to have that part of the dialogue too and understand where the other people are coming from.
I agree. I think but I don't know if you were in here, but are we an exploration agency that is NASA, and do we want spaceflight in general to be exploring? And I think that even subdivides into robotic and human missions.
It does.
Or do you want them to be operational, which means that you're like a commercial airline, and we put people up routinely, we bring people down safely routinely. That's what we do. If you want us to do something else, you're going to have to accept a different level of safety or a different risk level than what we do in normal operations. We can put people into LEO all day long. We're so comfortable with that. We'll hand that over to a commercial entity. But my personal perception is, if you go out to the moon, if you go out to an asteroid, if you go to Mars, and you have the public under the same perception that it is as safe as going to the space station, or as safe as you've made them feel about going to the space station, you're setting yourself up for failure. Whereas if you take the mission and you say, you know what, there are definitely dangerous things about this mission. We've done as much as we can possibly do on paper and on models, and we've spent as much time as we can on it. There's a time when you just have to go and find out what you don't know.
Shoot, we got to get there before the Russians do. It's an acceptable risk.
And there's no impending doom that we have to move fast for now. So what else can push us to accept different levels of risk? And for the management to say, okay, here's what's going to happen. We're going to go to the moon. And we're going to do everything we can to go, but at some point we just have to take off. If we
call space spade, I call out the pink elephant.
I mean, no, we've talked about China before too. Is that what we need to be? Is being scared enough though for a long-term space program? Because much like Apollo, if we build up and we go, well, we got to get there before China, and we do, then what?
Yes.
Or if China doesn't even make it, if they start doing space stations and they fail miserably and cancel their space program, and we're all awesome, like we're going to the moon, it's going to be so cool, and then we're secretly funding China because they're falling behind, and we don't want that because we need the pressures, and but you see how any good sci-fi show knows if you have an enemy, eventually you have to defeat the enemy, and then you need somebody bigger than them, and then you need somebody bigger than them, and then they have to cancel the series because you've had gods fighting each other. And
it's like what Candy was saying, that you need something more sustaining. Candy,
yes.
I'm going to have your hand up, but I'm just going to have this idea of something more sustaining.
Rather
instead
than
of
impulse.
just something more.
Right.
Not that having an enemy image just
Right.
That might be a temporary. That might just work for the moment.
Yeah.
In terms of like having something which is lasting and more sustaining, you need a story which is it's ironic in the sense that we went from having a culture where the idea was there's nothing to fear but fear itself, to then having to induce some kind of fear to get A done or B done or C done.
Okay, I want to pull what you were talking about, Oregon Trail with sustaining, because I think that's a really good word. And I think we're too hung up on exploration. Believe me, I like the word. But exploring, we're all born explorers. Yeah, we're all explorers. That's part of human nature.
Right.
Okay, what is the United States about and how did we get here? With people like our ancestors who came, risks for jobs, for opportunities.
Vision.
But it's vision, it's hope, it's something everybody can relate to. We want to live. How do you want to live? We want a job. Some of us have a passion for things, but that's what we don't do is the United States, a core value, a core who we are and how we got here is we had to take, I don't want to use I'm trying to come up with a different word so we can come up risks or, opportunities. Opportunities. Okay?
I actually think that's an important point, is that frontierism is hugely culturally important in the U.S.
Yes.
Like, just
Totally
look at
American.
SUV commercials. Like, they show them all driving on the Grand Canyon and stuff. I think
now on some alien
that
planet.
cultural idea of going places where we haven't gone before
Right.
is really important to
Yes.
America. And if we can tap into that, maybe
Right.
we don't need to
I think
be
the
afraid
big-
of China.
But that's the whole thing, that whole foundational thing I was trying to get at. Something where it's naturally linked, where you really don't have to put money into stuff. What we have to do is change, or get us to recognize, not even change, recognize
Just get us
that
to
it's
want
all
it.
out there. This is who we are.
Exactly.
I think the
This
big
is part
difference
of it.
between then and now is partly that the numbers, rather than just a few people taking the risk, there was lots of people sharing the risks going out to the frontiers. I'm not even sure they were
But
aware
that's
of the
what we
full
want to
risk.
change. Well, we want to change that. But first of all, we have to get everyone to understand this is our heritage.
Yeah.
That's what I'm doing personally with mine being Puerto Rican and the name Torres, and to say this inspired me. They're explorers. This is in my blood. I can't change, and I don't want to change who I am. This is how we got here. The stories, history will show you the same sorts of things. Oh my gosh, we're doing the same thing. We
we're
can
sort
do
of
this.
stagnating with
Right,
first
exactly.
premise.
We have to keep our brains are stagnating. And I want to go back to that point you were saying about the U.S. I think we just get hung up, and the only
Increased
thing,
number involved. That's what that says.
creativity,
Yes.
things we
It's a reading test back.
we get interested when there's fear, there's danger, there's tragedy, but it doesn't have to be that way. It has to be creative, and we got to wake up our
Adventure,
brains.
excitement, opportunity.
Right.
So,
Wake up the brains,
Balances out the danger.
which is what Hubble
does that mean
did.
that everything though what we're saying is, does that mean that NASA should only be about these things? Because at the beginning we talked about how NASA's this huge great, and we have all this stuff for their exploration and the bigger and going through and exploring and being who we are and our need to increase what we have and is inherently American, but that, as we said before, is a very small part of what NASA is.
Well, didn't say NASA. We were talking about the human, number one, just our society, because it's more than just a space program. That's one part of it. So I'm just talking about the
At
society
least play a role.
has to be
Somehow.
somehow like that. So I wasn't speaking specifically about NASA. I was
Right.
saying we are this. We know this, as you
Right.
said.
So how do you take that what you know and translate that to?
It's different. Yeah, it's going to have to be different ways.
You have an objective.
Well, the challenge.
Now, what is
The challenge to me sounds like marketing a new version of American exceptionalism, almost. I mean,
It's in us
because
already.
You're talking about frontiersmanship. You're talking about it's American exceptionalism. It's we're the ones who explore. We're the ones who go out and take the initiative. So.
And we don't have it. We don't want to get into the
I saw
negative
something,
aspect
in terms of language on one of the other pages, and I think that's a lot of what it would come down to. It's essentially redefining that in modern terms, conventional terms.
So can I get up on my soapbox for a minute? Oh, well,
Sure.
you haven't spoken at all, Armin. What do you go ahead?
Well, I just wanted to say, I don't think that Americans pursued the frontier because we had a romantic attitude about exploration. I think we pursued the frontier because we wanted free land in the West.
Well, that's the same jobs.
Work. But my point is, what is, and that's certainly what drew us along the Oregon Trail, for example.
Or most of our
what drew
ancestors
people to
did.
Texas.
Right. All of us, our ancestors came.
Was free land. Gone to Texas meant that you'd gone bust somewhere else, you know. And so,
not in the last 20 years.
Yeah, I think that part of the problem, one of the things that I think we're doing wrong in marketing the space program as a whole is that we're seeing ourselves as pushing the romantic exploration. Let us go forth and view the universe. Now that's a great idea, and I like it.
Catalyst.
But it's not going to it's going to be an interesting thing.
Right.
It's not going to fire. It's not going to cause people to dip into their wallets and spend tax dollars to build more launch vehicles. What we need to be able to say is, if we continue to go into space, these are the benefits that we are going to get from being in space. And it's got to be more tangible than simply saying...
That's a good word.
I see how you were talking like the Oregon Trail and moving forward. I see it more closer to a more modern time, maybe 1800s, of NASA being more like the government agencies that got private contractors to help them out to put the first east-west railroads.
Okay, or the first airline.
The first airliners. The first airliners, they could care less about the romanticism about flying. The concept was, I can now open up this new area, and they were willing to take a higher level of risk to do that.
Yeah.
And then, but then they could sell to the general population, this will be for you.
Right.
Well, the assumption, though, is that exploration is not beneficial, where only with exploration will then the discovery follow. The discoveries themselves are valuable because you're going to discover all things about the human body, all kinds of things about...
That's what you need to market, is what you're finding about.
Right.
So
Exploration is, well, that's what we were talking about.
Well, but exploration is the last resort. If we could figure out those things in a lab being safe, we would choose to do that way, right? I mean, if you could sit in a lab with a piece of paper and just sketch out the cure to cancer, that would be the optimal way to do it. You wouldn't want to go up and spend 4 years in space and $60 billion building a research facility on the moon to study how to beat cancer. That's like the long road. So, I mean, it seems like we're talking historically.
We're talking about the things
exploration was a last resort for people who had no other options, or for people who wanted something and couldn't find it any other way. We want new land. We can't make it. We can't fight for it. It's out there. Let's just go grab it.
So it's exploration in support of expansion.
And it,
we don't want to. We want to stay away from those negative. See, that's the thing. We have to clarify exploration. That's why I said it's not just about going into space. I'm trying to leave that aside for a moment, so that we understand exploration is the mind and being curious and wanting to know more.
But some people don't.
I know,
that's
my point.
The argument I'm having.
Right, but
that's what we've been bringing up, is how do you get a culture to be more experimental? How do you get a culture to be more scientific?
You can market the kids. A basic marketing philosophy when you go out is you can't market something that might be. And that's the problem with exploration and going out and saying everyone goes, oh, we get all these great byproducts from doing this. You can't say, why are you spending $10 billion this year on this?
I think we're about to actually run into somebody else's time, so I want to get you, since you've been waving a long time.
Okay, real quick, two things to get interest. One thing we can do, like we're doing right now, but we can do a little bit more, is promote all this to children, because no one's more curious, and
well, that's where we lose it. We lose it. We have to keep that aspect.
I know, we need to really promote it to kids and keep up with them generally to keep interest, because if you can really get a kid interested in something strongly enough, they'll stick to it. And second thing, irrelevant to this, what we could also do is push a little truth, because the part of the problem why we see this thing as unnecessary is because we feel it's a waste of money. But even though I would assume a lot of us in here aren't really economists, I'm not, but I'm just saying, somehow we can collaborate with other people, at least get the truth out, because people are saying, oh, we spend so much on this, so much on that, but they have no idea on the actual amount of money we spend on things. Like they said, foreign aid, we're helping way too many countries, but our foreign aid doesn't even break 1%.
It's all perspective.
Right, so how do we readjust their perspective? And that was my point of this. How do we readjust people's perspective from are we canceling NASA to something different? Oh, no, we're not canceling NASA. We're debating what program comes next in a specific piece of NASA, but NASA is still continuing its exploration on Earth, in the seas. We're still doing physiology research. We're still doing materials research. We're still doing chemical research. We're still doing aeronautics research. There's still a million things that NASA is doing, but we're debating about one of them that's very visible. So NASA isn't shutting down. We're just having a national debate about what we want to do next in this one small area that gets a lot of attention. And I think that's, how do you reframe that debate and tell people, no, NASA's not shutting down, we're not stopping space. The U.S. program is talking about a piece of our program that is very visible, but everything else keeps going. So I think all the other pieces that we're going through, I just want to make sure, is there somebody else that's scheduled to be in this room? And are you scheduled to be in this room or something?
There's show and tell for next hour, for the next 45 minutes. No, in the lobby.
Okay.
The next session doesn't start for a little while.
Oh, fantastic. So, okay, so just making sure that we had because that was the point of when people come up and start talking about NASA, and the fact that it's dead and gone, oh my God, there's no more space. What are you going to do with your life now that space is gone? I kind of look at my relatives and go, what crazy website have you been listening to? CNN!
Part of it is it's sensational.
Humor.
We got sensational news going on with it because what's one of the top things going on right now is job loss and economy. So on a political face, on a political needs, if you say, oh look, we're losing jobs here, we're losing jobs here, then it kind of like, well, if you're losing all these people, then they must be canceling NASA. There must be, because that's like, it's out there, the job loss, which that's part of the negative things that are impacting.
Well, and I think, I love the direction that we were going with this. I'm just going to sidestep it for 1 second to say, I think internally, too, we do a terrible job with this because everybody in this room could probably answer this question about, are we canceling NASA? No. Somebody else is doing something else I don't like, and that's why NASA's in trouble. And everybody would have a different somebody else, and everybody would have a different something else, and we bicker hard internally because there's a lot of engineers that use very hard data that they know to be true, and they cannot conceive of an alternate path than the ones they have laid out. And when we start talking to the public about those things and they see this disjointed, wait, I talked to 5 people and they all said 5 completely different things and swore that their thing was the reason, and that if these people would just listen to them, then everything would be fine. So they're like, you guys don't know what you're talking about. It must be stupid and wrong because nobody can agree on anything. Anyways, that's my 2 cents. I think we need to do a better job also of having a unified, what does it take to make NASA go, and is NASA really ending, is just as important as having an answer, we all can buy in on.
I think on kind of that concept of NASA does a fairly decent job of having a correct and unified outward message from official NASA, but they don't work at it to make that a unified feeling through NASA, because everyone that works, touches, is employed, married to, has kids of, family members are all their ambassadors. And they're like, well, I'm just watching CNN and they said it's fine, but my brother, and then in the social networking atmosphere we're in, that will carry more weight. I'd rather have NASA not say as much, but have its feeling known through its social. And like you said, the internal bickering is what everyone hears. Industry-wise, that's what's heard, not the contiguous message.
I think there's another motivating factor that's not been mentioned. I think it's a whole other dimension of the problem. Sorry to mention it.
Okay.
But it's getting more and more acceptable that we're actually looking for evidence of life on Mars. That I think would be extremely interesting to the public. At least certainly would. Especially those based on science fiction and such. Well,
what kind of life?
Well, right, and that's like a whole exploration and curiosity thing. But how is life on Mars going to improve my mortgage payment?
Yeah.
I mean, to be perfectly honest, I
Well-
just moved. I can't sell my house. I've got to pay now rent
It
on
might,
something else.
it
while
might
I'm paying
improve your,
mortgage.
it might improve your pharmaceuticals, it might improve your sense of.
But not today.
No, well, not tomorrow, today or tomorrow, but
Right.
but that's in that
Knowledge.
direction.
Yes,
It might,
expanding knowledge.
it might increase your ability to, all kinds of
Right. To me,
biological issues.
It'll let me live longer so I can pay my mortgage longer. That's what it's going
To me,
end
all
up
those
doing
things are
for me.
investments, not things I don't look at those things as things I'm spending money on. I look at them as things I'm investing in.
That's right.
I'm spending money on NASA so my grandkids don't deal with cancer.
But there are a lot of people that don't do any investing. If I was
Right.
investing, I would go invest in some good stock. But I'm not worried about investing right now. I'm worried about paying my mortgage.
Well, but
And-
that's,
and so
you know,
how
that's,
do I-
that's a whole other issue. It's the issue of we don't have the money to paint the bridge to keep it from weathering and falling apart. So instead of having a bridge that lasts 200 years, we have a bridge that lasts 20 years. And that's, and that sort of thing, that sort of thing happens all over the place, and it's just false economy.
I mean, when you said before about the arts, it brought me the projects and what you were looking at. I mean, this type of art debate of what to do and how to change perception, especially when it doesn't have an immediate effect, is the same thing the arts do all the time. People are like, oh my gosh, I don't have the money to pay my mortgage, and I just lost my job.
Except
but,
that NASA paid for
But
people.
what about the art museum that just got put in, and they still need money to run? And
Yeah.
people are like, well, what do they look at model? It's not like we're the only ones
Right.
that ever have that issue. There's entire industries in this country that work on that premise.
What I want to say is that sometimes we talk too much about the money, and I know it's not to say it's not important, but we have to think about value, because sometimes when people really value something, the money comes in second. But when we focus so much on the money, that's not what we're all about. We're about this other thing, with these other sets of values, these things that we really treasure are important. And when you said investment, I didn't think money. When you said it, money was not what came to mind, because I didn't think you meant that.
And it's
Yeah,
both.
yeah, but then the conversation went to money. So that's the same thing with exploration. We keep using it in certain contexts, but there are different ways to use the same words. Investment meaning not, yes, there's money part, but that's not, you're investing in your, so I guess it's loaded with these things. We can't seem to get out of that of certain mindsets, how we use words. It's just what I'm saying.
Well, and I think you made a very good point about the money, though, is that is where a lot of this conversation starts and why the bickering starts.
Right.
The scientists don't care about the human spaceflight because they're going to get their money pulled. And the human spaceflight doesn't care about the science because they're worried about making sure that their system is robust enough to be recoverable. But it feels like everybody's looking at a very small pie and how they can best get their biggest slice of a small pie, instead of how do you make the pie grow?
Right.
How do you invest in what we have in a way that makes the pie expand so that everybody's piece gets bigger instead of fighting over the crumbs?
Right.
Because
And
nobody wants to invest in something that has internal bickering and fighting over crumbs.
When you have
it's obvious from the outside, and when you see a company where everybody's infighting and, oh, well, I need to get my project funded, you know what, I'm going to go find somebody else to talk to and invest in. I don't want to deal with you guys because you don't have confidence that you're going to be around long enough to get all this stuff done, or that you have the resources that you need to do it. And I think if you could stretch back a little bit, and maybe that's why we haven't invested in commercial before, is, well, I don't want to put money into commercial because who knows what's going to happen. Maybe it's money down the drain and I'll never get that back. You know, whereas a commercial industry could expand out our possibilities. It doesn't necessarily.
I know Tim's sessions go forever, but the planetarium is now loading for a 20-minute show if anybody wants to see. But Tim, please continue.
So that's my big thing is how do we make people look at the pie getting bigger so we quit fighting with each other and just
There was
look
a sociologist, B.J. Bluth, and she was there's a book NASA printed with all people from different fields. She was outside the field in sociology, writing about NASA. Then she was hired by NASA, and she experienced it. She was an expert outside. Then when she got inside, it's like her voice was not the same, was not heard the same way. But she wrote about that, and that after you have all the money with working as a team for one big goal, but then once you start in those other little projects, that's what's happening, is they're all competing for the funding for all that. But she wrote about that 20-something years ago. So a lot of these issues have been written about, studied, and nothing done with them. Well, most of the time you have to be an expert or interested in the sociological issues. But they're there. The information is there. She's in NASA. She was at headquarters to really resolve a lot of the issues we're discussing. And she
apparently didn't work.
It wasn't her fault. She got it. Once you get into an organization, you're no longer the same as when you were outside.
Right.
You're a respected expert outside, and not when you're
an expert is somebody that lives 50 miles away from you and has a briefcase. and if they live in your company, no profit is acceptable.
Yeah.
All right, well, I don't want to keep anybody from going to the planetarium, but I don't want to stop the conversation either. I want to go to the planetarium. Anyways, I think I'm going to do a session on that today or tomorrow.
I have a really quick statement.
Go. I'm not stopping you. It's your session.
I went to an AIAA talk at the Gilbert last year. They had some handful of like Apollo era, systems engineer guys. And they're all kind of like, trying to, it was like an open forum, you can ask them questions, and the question was, why did they get involved with NASA? Well, I don't remember their names, I don't remember exactly what they said, but all of them said that they didn't work with NASA or space before, and the main reason, the main event that got them involved with, that got them excited about working for NASA or trying to get a job with NASA was Sputnik. It was something completely, they had no background whatsoever with space, and it was because of Sputnik. And the reason was somebody put a satellite above the United States, and there's nothing the United States could do about it. It was a national security threat. It had nothing to do with space whatsoever.
Yeah.
So, I hate to say this, but NASA was founded on politics, and it needs politics to live. So they have to tell a story that has to flow with the contemporary events of today.
Well, NASA does. I
does.
think that's, again, we can branch out and say, that's NASA, right? That doesn't have to be the space industry. People have NASA.
Well, if you want money for the space industry, you're going to have to. You're going to have to play the same game.
Thing. You've collapsed NASA and the space industry into one entity.
Industry means you get money from some entity, and so you can further and continue your enterprise, right?
Yeah, but you could do. There's entire dozens of companies currently.
Satellite companies do not get their money
satellite,
from NASA.
Maybe not.
Right, but in the
space
beginning,
tourism, probably not.
But in the beginning, who were all the satellites being funded by?
Probably defense.
DoD or NASA or somebody else, right? But eventually, people figured out, hey, wait a minute, this is something good for industry.
My cell phone calls.
I can't tell you what that's going to be yet, but I'm sure the same thing happened with any other major invention. Who's going to use a car for God's sake?
Hold on.
One of those things. I have a horse.
But once you get the money that can get the cell phones working and stuff, the minimum number, I bet you the money runs out.
That's
once there's an accident in space, space tourism, the money runs out.
That's if the only reason. No one in space tourism, none of the companies I've talked to have gone into it for space tourism.
I know, it's multiple other reasons.
They see it as their cash, the initial cash.
Right.
They're like, we don't have a Congress to go to for money, but we're essentially going and looking for angel founders, and we're going to get $200,000 to $300,000 a pop. We're going to go find people that are going to pay for this. And
it's a means to an end, in other words.
Their plan is, they think it will always be money in, but at the moment they're like, it's a tourist ride, and we're wanting to fund satellite research or microgravity. There's a list of like 100 researchers that are willing to pay up like $3 or $4 million to go up into space on research on suborbital flights.
Right.
And so they're like,
into those talks,
and go up, and they're not. That's not a one-time thing. That's like universities going, I want one flight a year for 20 years. And you're like, oh, okay. Imagine like 6 grad students going up into space doing a research project costs your university $1 million.
And that's an industry. That's creating an industry out from spaceflight and something related to it. But right now, because NASA has been the major player and is the gorilla in the room that tells everybody what to do, they are collapsed with the space program. So when people hear, NASA's got a budget cut, well, we're canceling space, right? And they would never say, I can't even think of anything that would come in the same. I heard that we were canceling an airplane from the Department of Defense. Are we canceling the DoD? Is the Army being disbanded?
Is going down, and so we're not going to build any more of that. So DoD is not.
Yeah. JSF is going away, so apparently we don't have an Army anymore. I don't know what happened.
They're gonna cancel all wars, you know.
Yeah, I mean, the people in Iraq just put down their weapons and took off their clothes and went, I don't know what I'm doing. The astronauts are now floating around with no spacesuits on because they don't know what to do.
Well, I think
there's no
another of your line of questions should be who should try to sustain interest, because a lot of people have kind of decided that's like part of their job description. Should that be part of the job description? I don't know.
I think it should be an interest.
If it is, they should
for
be
NASA.
a lot better at it.
But they're also, it's coming up. But I know like what do they call themselves? The Personal Spaceflight Federation now, or the Commercial Spaceflight? Is starting to take that over for the commercial industry. And it has 20 some odd companies that are all commercial space, from Virgin to SpaceX to Boeing to Lockheed to ATK, are all there promoting their own space agendas.
I mean, no offense, but I think Hollywood does a much better job sustaining interest. Like, let's face it, Gene Roddenberry's a genius, man. The thing is that, or George Lucas, but what I'm getting at is maybe NASA should focus on coming with a how to really go further space, and then maybe let hand us over to some other commercial interest, like, hey, J.J. Abrams, go make me a movie about NASA. Do whatever you want. You use your artistic license and let them do the selling part, but NASA focuses on missions, mission planning, engineering, whatever, stuff like that.
I mean, I think you can get external help that would help NASA.
Right.
But at the same time, what gives it its credibility is not handing everything out. If NASA became an outsourced thing of what we do, then you get that disconnect between, I'm sure you could hand a Hollywood studio something, they come back with an amazing marketing plan, video, game, setup that was amazing. But, you're like, oh, I'm using PlayStation Move and I'm building a satellite in space. This is amazing. But would that actually be what you're doing? If it's not what you're doing, you've lost a little credibility. You want to take it to the next level and engage, but if you start getting too many levels apart, then you've created a movie frenzy, you're popular for 4 months and you go away.
CSI, people will watch CSI and then they go in the forensics, they'd be like, this takes way longer than I thought it would.
Yeah, and that's what I put up there. Like, did we kill curiosity? People don't have a long-term sustainability in anything anymore. They watch CSI and it's do, and you know who the guy was. Like the killer is so and so because we took an eyelash and
but
DNA
people
analysis
thought
on
about
our
it for a
pocket.
while. At least that's the important part.
That's true.
And I'm not saying, look, this is why I asked the question: who should sustain interest? Should it be NASA's job or not?
Well, I think that's a valid question, but I think any agency needs to sustain interest in its own interests. The question is how do you best do that? And what I just heard you say, NASA isn't willing to invest in a good program of public, or hasn't been willing to invest in really that broad outreach to people, maybe.
And Tim, you might know more about this, but isn't NASA legally not allowed to advertise?
It's a misnomer.
It's not allowed to.
Not exactly.
How does that work?
I know what you're talking about. It's not allowed to advertise, but there's
I've looked. It's not there. Everyone keeps telling me this, and it's just. I found actually clauses that say by law they're required to.
They're allowed to. They're required to disseminate information publicly, and I think it's one of those. I think it's an issue where somebody said we're not allowed to do paid advertising on the Super Bowl, but we are supposed to do public outreach, and there's a decision made by an individual or person of where that line is, and they're very conservative with it because they don't want.
They jump in a swimming pool and come out with surf dress blues and view the crowd, the Marines. It's like boom, everyone wants to sign up.
National need.
So if NASA put out an ad to recruit
engineers,
because any government agency is allowed to do that.
Now here's the other side. Boeing can put out an ad on the Super Bowl. Boeing and Lockheed and Honeywell could get together and decide that they wanted to spend $15 million on a Super Bowl ad and put one on that is effing amazing.
Heck, even A&M did it with
if they wanted to. There's no reason they can't because they're a private entity. Now, are they going to do that? I can't I don't see them investing money in making the public interested because they don't know what the return would be. There would be a tangible return on their investment.
Is that what's preventing NASA from making NASA TV the Space is Awesome channel as opposed to the
NASA TV was never intended to be the Spaces. I've talked to the NASA TV people because I share your frustration with them. And what they said was NASA TV was originally put on the air as a way for people to record the videos that we had without us having to send out VHS tapes. It was a cost saver. And then it became, because we broadcast things at specific times, you can set up your VCR, record it. Yeah, it was supposed to be public access. Then we decided to broadcast what we were doing in space because we had the live feed. Might as well throw it up when we weren't doing anything else. And then we have a place where we can do press conferences.
So you have 5 minutes of awesomeness.
People liked it so much, they started playing it all the time, and then they expected...
Because the original content was those educational videos. There was like those school news clips and everything that you would show up at like 4 a.m. in the morning, and the librarian would take an hour, and if you wanted to, you could grab the tape from the librarian, or some schools had feeds in them, but that was only like an hour or two of content a week, but this is how they distribute it. Now we're like, well, why don't you go online? And they're like, well, because we set up a whole TV station, we might as well use it.
And now they can use press conference, but then people started going there expecting to see.
C-SPAN has a very good use, but now there's C-SPAN 2 and C-SPAN 3, and there's actual programming that is somewhat interesting if you watch it at the right time.
But C-SPAN has always been branded as, this is the boring crap that nobody watches.
Yeah, but
except the people that want to watch it. And I think what happened with NASA TV was people got so excited about NASA TV, they were like, oh my god, did you see there's an astronaut up there? Oh, let's go, I'll go watch them. And after a couple of years, they went, I don't even know who this guy is. Why aren't they telling us who these people are? Why don't they add some stuff?
Unless they, get into
it
a love
was like
triangle.
a public outcry for, we need more information on this channel that you set up as a public feed. And so NASA hasn't known what to do with it. Like, okay, well now we need to give a little more money. And now everybody goes, why don't you have the Mythbusters on there? Like,
exactly.
Because that's not our purpose in having NASA TV. NASA TV it's just supposed to be crap that we throw out there. Now
why don't they say, hey, we realize that's what it started out as, but since the advanced people say, why don't you have these types of things? Why don't they grow with it?
Exactly. It's
government.
Which mission would you like to cancel so that you can get NASA TV money?
Who you?
I mean, that's what it comes down to. With a defined pie, which mission do you want to cancel to give NASA money? And this is the risk thing too. If the pie gets cut down at all, somebody's losing money. It's not like Google where NASA can put money into 20 projects, one of them wins and
Look, Robonaut. Let's look at Robonaut. I worked on Robonaut, and the thing is, it's like I talked to a brother-in-law, and he's like, yeah, I'm working on this stupid, the shipping crate for Robonaut for the next, mission. He's like, holy cow, you're working on Robonaut? And he's like, there's a Facebook page for Robonaut. I was like, holy cow, I went on there to Thanksgiving. It's like, yeah, thank you, all you engineers. Robonaut's really happy that my shipping crate's right, and I'm ready to fly. I worked on countless projects. When's the first time I ever had a project with a freaking Facebook page? And it has more friends than my Facebook page. I'm a real person, man. I'm like, look, the thing is there's going to be new technology, and NASA's going to have to embrace it with the media, and they're going to have to learn how to use it because it's working, And it's on the History Channel. I heard that there's a Robonaut special on
packaging.
Yeah, packaging.
It was Sleeper.
Sleeper. Actually, I had another acronym is more like retard, but Robonaut Enclosure Transfer Assembly for the reason. I rejected it.
But so where do we get the funding for that kind of stuff? Does that need to be, an NSF grant or somebody else? Because I agree with you. I would love to see NASA TV be awesome, and it's gotten incrementally less sucky. But it's gotten way better over the years. But at the same time, it's still not the History Channel. It's not Discovery Channel, and I don't know that it needs to be.
No, but it could also be. A lot of things NASA's like, they have almost a control issue that they have to keep it.
Yes.
There's nothing saying that NASA couldn't give the rights to use the word NASA to someone else and be like,
produce a TV
we
channel,
have veto. We can say that, we're not putting our name on that. But, NASA doesn't have to be the only producer on it.
They did open that up, and they had an RFI for somebody to come in and take over NASA TV, and there were no takers.
I don't think they know how to write an RFI to media.
Well, and let me just, I don't know what the RFI was like.
You can't show anything
but
by target.
I know specifically that when NASA gives the media access to their feeds, it is literally, these are feeds coming off of the cameras. You can jack in and take this feed directly. If there is anything that NASA produces and distributes, it has to follow government guidelines for distributed materials, for accessibility, for multilingual translations, and for a host of other required pieces that, documentation, and it has to have numbers, and that's a cumbersome piece to put on any type of entity that's wanting to do paid programming that cannot have any advertising in it.
I do have a question though.
You know what I mean? Like, how would Discovery Channel fund all that stuff if they couldn't sell ads on it? And they had to make sure that it was all accessible and that it was available to everybody, and that they gave it away freely. And but PBS has.
They get donations. They also get government subsidies.
I think they get a government subsidy, but NASA can't take a donation. Let me tell you the most frustrating thing in the world: people that want to pay NASA and can't.
You can't give NASA money?
They don't have like an income account. I don't know. It's very weird. Yeah, you can reimburse NASA for services that they provided you or something like that, but through a NASA Act agreement. But you can't just pay NASA. You can't give NASA money. NASA can't get a grant.
That would be so cool.
It's very crazy.
Does NASA have like a video production staff?
Oh yeah.
They do.
They pay people.
Like,
although ask Ben about the cameras they have.
Aren't they frustrated as hell if they can't do more?
Cameras.
And they probably can't jazz up anything. Like
go buy $20,000
Oh, I'm sure there's so
many software programs you can use that spice it up a little bit.
But that's like a
reality TV shows or like that stuff.
Yeah, a 4-year-old could do better than that.
Well, they have a show like about ice trucks, ice wreckers. I'm like, holy cow, they can jazz that up.
Yes,
we can't jazz like a lumberjack regular mission on the space station.
You seen Wall-E? So that's my take on this whole thing. We've killed curiosity to the point that we're going to have blobs floating around on chairs watching TV with a bicycle because we won't let them take any risks.
It freaked me out when I saw the 6-month-old with an iPhone.
Let me tell you.
I was like,
18-month-old, she knows how to put through the iPhone.
It was
ridiculous.
And she has her own Twitter.
Oh, she does.
Yeah.
That's way better than
we're fighting against society.
Well, I want to say something in defense of video games really quick. Because, I agree with you in that, but I think video games are much more actively encourage curiosity and experimentation and exploration than passive multimedia like
If you ever play a NASA video game.
doing the younger kids. But I honestly think the younger kids don't need as much help as we think they do. They're already curious. What I was always worried about is that junior high and high school kids.
Yes.
The one that's, I'm like, because I keep asking like the junior and high school, what do you want to be when you grow up and why? And they're like, I don't know. I was thinking, and you get answers now of investment banker and Wall Street analyst, and then you ask them why, they're like, because I hear that within 3 years out of school I can make $150,000. And
what are you going to do with that $150,000? I don't know. Buy a recliner and a big golf. That's
the reason. People, they don't go into, they're like, why don't you go into science and engineering? They're like, it's really hard and it doesn't pay well and no one thinks it's cool.
Because everybody now can get quick fix. There's a Canadian who did a thing about, everything's getting worse, nothing's getting better, the elevator's always going down, they said stop. But he was saying it's a great MPI. It's definitely like email and information. It's suppressing your flight. But one thing he said was, nothing will be interesting anymore because we can find everything so quickly. So that's part of the reason why curiosity is not there, because it's like, oh well, it's so easy to just look at what stocks are online and I can make money off of it instead of learn learning and doing something, researching into it and getting real genuine, like, oh, I did something, and doing STEM education. Because then you have to really think, why you don't have to you're in a society where there's stuff like that.
We don't think of it delayed gratification.
The amount of effort, the big one I have is effort. People just don't want to put effort in. Like I was going to a school and they were one of the parents was trying to convince me that there was no need to have math higher than geometry in high school. And I was trying to come up with an argument of...
Do you know how your Xbox works? No! I know how it works because I took math!
Exactly. I mean, some things are like, does everyone need to become
it's very
an
loud,
engineer?
simple words like that, and it goes
like, I'm
miles
be artists and investment bankers and dancers, all of these things. But at the same time, proportionately, we just don't have the base of if everyone, people going to school and then they go to college, like, oh, that's really cool over there, let me try that instead. But if we're not putting in enough people that are just kind of interested in it, and I think this comes back to like trying to explain stuff to people, what we're trying to do is explain the rocket science to people that don't know what algebra is. And you're like,
if we had been focusing the last 20 years on the same math and science that we focused on 20 years prior to that, people wouldn't be as screwed by their credit card companies anymore because they would be able to get it. They'd be able to do the math. Wait a second, I'm not paying it.
Yeah.
And there'd be like millions of people saying that, and so the companies would not get away with it. If we were smart, if the public was smarter, then the few people who are smart wouldn't be screwing over the people. Everybody.
Well, this ain't like we'll be gone.
Well, but so what is the problem then? If we're all out there screaming about it, it feels like we're not screaming the right words. And I think, Camilla's presentation this morning, Romeo had a good point that scientists come out, and I think it comes back to this, where you have a program manager or anybody that's in the science field, anybody that's too deep inside their own field loses touch with reality completely. And all of a sudden you've got them talking acronyms and they're using jargon, and I mean, you're so far into the academic field. I was in a session with you and you were talking school things that I had no idea what the heck you were talking about. Your 4D this and this type of CTE, and I was like, hi, I have no clue what you're talking about. I don't get any of that. So is it something about our terminology that we're not connecting with the people because we don't even understand what they're looking to learn?
No, we have to answer the question why. Why should you fork over a significant amount of your income to help us out to do something that we want to do?
And see, I have a problem with the terminology you're using right there. Why you should fork over money to me. That's not how this actually works. You're not.
Okay, you don't have to say it that bluntly, but you have to fund somebody else to do something.
The mentality that you're using is an us and them mentality. Why is it an us and them? Why aren't
there's a lot more of them than there's very few of us. That's why it's us and them.
Well, why aren't we investing our money more efficiently?
I don't think we should be arguing against people that don't want to, or most people don't have an opinion not to do space. They just are ill-informed in general. They're like, why? They're asking, why do you need money? What are you doing? And we should do a really good job of having available to them when they want to find more details and kind of putting out there some information and locations to get information of what we're doing and what we're proposing. Not going, we demand this or the world will die. Because no one responds to that.
Or the LSP instrument is an integral part of the spectroscopy of the moon. What?
Yeah.
We want to know how the moon was made so we understand the Earth so that we know what to do on it. Everybody goes, what do you mean how the Earth was made? We know all that crap. I learned it in school. And they're like, yeah, not really. We figured out that was wrong.
Did you hear about Pluto?
Yeah, did you hear about Pluto? We found things in the solar system bigger than Pluto, so now it's kind of like not a planet. Dennis, you were...
Sorry, I just walked in.
Don't be sorry for walking in. It's okay.
I don't want to say anything that's already been covered, but have you guys talked about games at all?
but I would love to because I've been taking notes on a game I would like to make about space exploration. So
okay, let me give you an example. I went to a usability conference in Vancouver like 3.5 years ago, and I'm sitting with a guy that has built Gmail Chat, a Microsoft Surface researcher, and a Sony product developer out in California, and we're just having a conversation. And the head guy at the front, the big brain, says, "So who's got some ideas about what's coming, right?" And I raised my hand and I said, "Well, we haven't discussed Google Image Labeler, right? And the ability to take two people in completely separate areas of the planet and have them verify data based on an image that they're looking at, right? Like there's something to be said about games, and the term that's coming is gamification, right? The gamification of the workplace, gamification of science and research." So you ask, like, how do we keep their interest? What do they care about? How do we explain ourselves? When really you don't have to. I mean, a lot of the time, people find that interest themselves. This whole citizen science or citizen scientist thing is already a thing. We don't have to figure out how it's going to work. It already works. The question is, all right, how do you make it so that other people can play the game too, right? And when you think about it that way, then it's different. Then
that's how you make it constructive instead of just everybody going on Google and finding why the sky is blue and then not doing anything else.
Well, Google Image Labeler had come up, right? And so I brought it up, Google Image Labeler, and the guy at the front of the room is like, "I don't really understand what you're saying." And I said, "So we're having a usability discussion on how to bring thousands of people into a web space and have a proper communication channel. And Google Image Labeler is a platform for that. So what are games going to do?" And he said, I don't see what you're saying. Separate of that, okay, completely separate of that. At my office, ESMD through KSC has come to us and said, "We have this platform that has there are 9 different simulators, right? And these 9 different simulators are multi-million-dollar simulators, and the way we're sharing data out of those is by recording them and then emailing it to other engineers." And we're going like, wait, what? You have like these multi-million-dollar 3D interactive simulators that you can't get data out of? And they said, no. JPL thought it would take 20 million in 5 years to do it, right? So we went back to it and we thought about it. It's like, okay, what systems can we use that already work on that work on the 3 major platforms, Linux, Windows, and OS X, and are light enough but scalable so that multiple people can enjoy them at the same time? Video games, right? So we gut out the game portion of that video game engine and start streaming the telemetry streams from these multi-million-dollar simulators, and suddenly you have a visualization platform that you can spread out to every single center at like no cost, right? That's one way to solve that problem. So
that's awesome.
That's one. That's okay. Yeah, that's awesome. How do we replicate that? How do we make
the world the simulator?
Yeah. Right? Well, let me bring up something else. There's a free amateur developed space simulator called Orbiter.
Yeah, I use it all the time. I'm freaking addicted to that.
I love Orbiter.
Right, so you stop playing it around.
No. You're addicted. It's like
now I can launch space shuttle.
It's like a flight sim only for spacecraft.
That's what most people want to do.
But it's developed by like one guy.
It's free.
Someone else to do art. It's free. It's updated, but it's only updated like every 2 years. But every time it's updated, it's really exciting, and it's like the thrill of when you finally get the map right to get into low Earth orbit. It's just amazing. Let me give you so much work.
I don't know jack about like.
Let me give you one more. I want to give you one more example. One more example.
Books about it.
And this is a very recent example.
But I mean, just
go ahead.
One second. Like, but that's just one guy. If NASA could just put a couple guys on doing something like that.
But I don't think NASA should have to.
Well,
that's why we asked the question, should they have to advertise?
No. See, that's the problem is that it's just one guy doing it. It's only updated every once in a while, and so there's only a small
check out the YouTube videos on like Orbiter Sim. Like, I went on
there's
there.
There's a really awesome community around it, but like there are still places where it's really difficult to set up.
I can't even install it at work, and I'll get fired in 3 seconds by IT.
If you had some company
I'm not kidding.
actually make an awesome flight sim,
I can't show how cool it is, really. But
freaking amazing.
All right, let me give you another example. About maybe like 18 months ago, this little game showed up. Totally alpha software. You get to walk around. The only thing you can do, is either destroy or create squares. That's
Minecraft.
That's all you can do, right? You can destroy or create squares. And the guy's like, you know what? I'm gonna release it. Let's see how it does. If I can create a simple enough system where they can pay me or contribute some kind of code or whatever to this, maybe we can build something from it. This thing takes off, right? One dude. Within 12 months, he's making $600,000 a month. Okay. Now it's not just about creating and destroying squares. Now these squares have properties: cement, brick, wood. You can actually craft in it. You can combine X number of these squares with X number of these squares to make this new thing. You can create a boat. You can go fishing. Suddenly, it's an immersive environment. So again, it's one guy. It's life, right? It's life. So if one guy can think that the basic property of entertainment is construction, it's not badges, it's not points, okay? It's not I checked in and 300 other people checked in at the same time. I could care less, and I think most people really just want to entertain themselves, They want to role play. That's the most important part of this, right? So when I follow Camille SDO, I'm role playing. I'm thinking, man, if that was me, right? And when I get interested in the space program, if that was me, right? There's your special ingredient. If that was me, right? So what are we doing about that?
Why don't we do Call of Duty NASA, man? Like you could be an astronaut, train for mission, do EVAs and
because
junk.
NASA,
I don't even see that.
Moonbase Alpha was a step in that direction.
Yeah, but it wasn't.
But Moonbase Alpha didn't talk to the gaming community, which is who is going to pick it up, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to build this beautiful game, and it's awesome, and you're going to be able to wire things like MacGyver. No, that's not why I want to play a game in outer space. I want to go.
On the
EVA.
NASA side, you're like, okay, you want this game, and you're saying, well, they need to talk to the gaming community. Is that the community NASA needs to talk to?
Yes.
Why not?
Why not?
Essentially, future electrical engineers.
Seriously, these are the people who are who can get into this stuff. Understand the math and who will love it.
It's a multidisciplinary community. That's the thing. You're looking at psychology, community building, mathematics, engineering. These are the people that are going to replace us. I mean, these are the people that are the next generation coming. The systems and subsystems necessary to run massive multiplayer online role-playing games are these kids. And these kids have these platforms on their PlayStation 3, on their Xbox. They know how it works. You may not, but they do.
Yeah. I'm going to have to ask them for a few tips.
And I think and when somebody says, I want to be a game designer, I want to know how to do that. What do they end up doing? They end up learning math. They end up learning not just physics, but how to code physics engines to look realistic. And I almost, a lot of the stuff that NASA does, which is great, but I think we've identified that people say, who cares? How does that impact me? It's not making me any money. It's not paying my mortgage. And I also don't see a direct benefit to anything that I'm doing. Whereas if there was an application for some of these things, if people understood the way that space weather affects your cell phone reception, they'd be a lot more in tune to it and not plan on having a conference call while they were walking in the park that day, because they'd know, oh wait, I need to rearrange my plans because we're going to have a lot of solar activity that day, so I'll make sure I'm on the landline to talk to you. Can you imagine somebody in the fashion industry saying that to a group? I mean, just consider for a moment how the world would have shifted if we had that type of conversation going. That people were actually using that type of data in their daily lives. But we don't brand it that way. We do not brand it that way.
Yeah, we don't. And that's the thing that keeps us back, because we're not. Because smart technical people don't take ownership, take themselves out with what Dennis was saying, what if I was them?
Yeah. Because that's the cool stuff they want to do is know how to build a game out of blocks, And NASA goes, that is not our core intention. What does that have to do with anything? But I mean, so anyways, we were talking about gamification. NASA has been doing some of that, and other people in the space industry, I don't want to just talk NASA, have been doing that, and that's been insanely successful from what I understand. Galaxy Zoo. Has anybody heard of Galaxy Zoo?
It's like Google Image Labeler.
People. Okay, so they take these massive sky surveys, and they have gigabytes of gigapans.
Oh, yes.
And you can take, the software automatically identifies an object of interest and it just,
hold it up.
Has no idea what it is. So then it's up to an individual person. You can get it on your iPhone or your Android and flip through, and you can look at it and go, I think that's a spiral arm galaxy because it looks like it's got little things. So you tag it as a spiral arm galaxy. It has, it looks like it's pink, it's pretty, and you put tags on it, and then you go to the next one. And other people will look at that same image and go, no, I think that's a disk galaxy, and it's pink and it's pretty. And so it actually sorts the data based on game. It's just people trying, I want to look at it and be the first person to look at this thing and label it and see if what I found is something interesting. Or that's lens flare. It doesn't even look like anything. That's stupid. Let's keep going. The same with SETI at home, having your computer run looking for aliens, alien signals, not aliens themselves. That would be weird to find on your computer. Inside of massive radio data, it's one of the. I guess it was the first distributed.
It's the massively distributed system that all other massively distributed systems are based on.
And it was about space, finding aliens because people thought that it was cool and they wanted to find aliens. Now we can do tons of other things with that data too, but.
Used to be my screensaver.
And Stardust at home was the same way.
It used to be the screensaver of every computer science department across the country. It was
back on P2s. That's awesome. And now this one I hadn't even heard of, the MSIP Mars Student Imaging Program. Basically, students get to propose an area on Mars that they would like one of the Mars orbiters to image.
I've heard of this.
And it was a middle school class, like a 7th grade class had proposed they wanted this area and why they wanted it, and they took a picture. So they get the data first, since they proposed it, and get to pore over it and see if there's anything interesting. And they said, it looks like there's a hole in our picture. What is that? And NASA said, that's the first evidence we've had of a lava tube open to the surface of Mars. The kids are like, cool, what does that mean? They're like, habitation possibilities, like you can cap it and live in there. And they were like, dude, we found caves on Mars you can live in, that's awesome. Can we get another picture? No. But that was what happened when they opened it up to gamification of, you guys pick a spot and tell us why it's cool, and we'll let you be the first ones to dig into it and see what's actually there.
I mean, look at the Centennial Challenges, right? Like, there's a dude who successfully built an astronaut glove in his garage, right? And so I'm at the IPP, the award ceremony, right? It's open to the public. Like, the public doesn't even know. There may be 15 people sitting there, and I'm flipping out because this guy's like the baby Tony Stark. I mean, we're talking Iron Man here, right? So they say to the guy, now that you've won all this money, now that you've figured out how to make this glove, what are you going to do?
Suit.
And he goes, I'm building a suit. And I'm sitting there, and it hits you, and it's this moment that's like, holy cow, it's the future. Like, this is what's coming, and it's rapidly approaching, and some dude is gonna walk out of his garage in the middle of a blizzard on some, dark night where he doesn't want his neighbors to see it, and his kids are gonna be videotaping him, and he's gonna be in a spacesuit, and he will have built it from scratch.
I will say this, there may be less people interested in space exploration and science in general, but the people who are so freaking into it that they can do amazing things.
Has anyone ever played Space Station Sim? It's a simulator that uses the actual ISS components. You can build your own space station out of the Unity and the Zvezda and Zarya. And it's not the most popular video game, but if someone could take that idea and make it into something like a roller coaster tycoon.
That's actually what I was thinking.
Like SimCity, you can make a Sim space station and have it real.
Right.
It'll be realistic.
Most of it, and if you hear what we're talking about, it's building blocks, right?
Yeah.
So I can destroy it and I can create a square. But with that square, I can now make a house, or I can make a bridge, or I can make the Eiffel Tower, or I can make the International Space Station, right? You go from one little component to being able to bring in a bunch of different people, and you're building something that doesn't even exist yet, right? And then maybe stress testing it, maybe adding a physics or fluid dynamic simulation onto this thing, and suddenly you've got a usable system for science.
And if it becomes like sitting at home,
right? all those components. I mean,
somebody's going to discover the right idea that's going to.
If you could, okay, so who here plays World of Warcraft?
I used to.
Okay, then this may fall on a little bit of deaf ears, but
I think you should ask who here will admit that you play.
Well, yeah. But I mean, I read an article about a science teacher who figured out that the process that people used to discover strategies against bosses was essentially the same as the scientific method.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, and these people would just find and optimize these strategies, and if you could.
That's that's what that word is, gamification. You're going to hear it more and more and more. GDC is in like 2 weeks, and they now have a Game Developers Conference, and they now have a whole session just on gamification. This is like psychologists and game builders, and this is where you get people to look. They have entrepreneurs and Fortune 500 companies that are going to show up, and they're going to have a conversation about gamification, because that in some ways is the future also. It's like, so you have a bump on a log at a desk doing the same exact process every single day. Well, then you can kind of create a structure around that, create a story around that simple little thing that he or she's doing every day, make a game of it, or make it something where they're actually maybe interacting with the other bump on the log one cubicle over, and now they're playing ping pong, or they're playing tennis, or they're doing something that is a repeatable action that's doing the same exact job, that's doing it more efficiently, right? And they actually want to go to work.
There's only one danger about gamification. I used Orbiter to teach a grad school class in orbital mechanics. And I have TA just to get people excited about it, because it's like, how the hell do you get them excited about home and transfer functions? So I would
by
basically
showing them an application.
Yeah, I'd write MATLAB code and then basically do the ascent stuff. But the thing is, in the slides, I make it really important that this is not a substitute for an engineering. You have to go read the textbook. But at least it makes you open the book. That's what it does, right?
Well, and it provides a context for what you're doing.
Yeah.
So, I didn't understand physics at all until I studied, I understand physics and calculus very close together. It's kind of hard to figure out them apart from each other. Like, if you're just studying calculus alone, you're like, what would I ever use this for? And if you're just studying physics alone, you're like, where do you get all these equations?
It's why it's nice to learn the history of the science experiments that led to the theories that we have.
But games can provide a great context to understand why this is interesting stuff to know.
If you have to solve this problem in a game, and you stumble upon this equation, and then you look it up, and hey, this matches.
And if you look at the people who did all these original things, it kills me when I look somebody up and people treat them like, oh my gosh, did you know that they also wrote books and poetry?
Yeah, exactly.
And, Ben Franklin wrote this satirical political science stuff. He was like the Jon Stewart of his time, and the Albert Einstein of his time, and nobody gets that. Like, what? And they're like, how did he do it? Well, because there wasn't this boundary, and we nowadays say, well, you're an engineer, honey. You can't be a princess and an engineer. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, tell that to my sister.
Right. My daughter isn't going to understand that. She's going to be like, Daddy, I rewired the wand. Now Which, that's cool, honey. Make it out of Legos next time. But I think we tend to box people into, well, if you're going to learn physics, you need to learn physics the way that I was taught physics, which was the way it was developed 50 years ago, as though that was the way physics was meant to be taught. We definitely like to segment people off, and I think this gamification is probably a sign, as well as this whole instantaneous quick fix mentality that we're looking at. We've got to change the way that we engage people, period. And saying, well, you're going to learn aerospace engineering because that's applicable to airplanes, or you're going to learn physics because you need to learn physics, doesn't work anymore. When people can say, why? I can look up the answer on the internet anyways. Why do I need to know the process to go through to learn this answer? And it's so that you can win, so that you can.
You're like, you don't get a job so you can build the thing that someone already built.
Right.
You get a job so you can build something that is new.
Or slightly better.
You're like,
slightly upgraded.
You're wanting to do something to the next level. Whenever I talk to a kid and he's like, "Oh, I can just go look it up," And I'm like, yes. He's like, you probably didn't have the internet when you were in school. I was like, oh, geez, do I look that old?
I did have the internet, but the thing, I had to put things on the internet because they didn't exist before I did them.
It's like, what
you
do
have
you want
to
to
be
do?
the author, not just the reader.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of kids don't understand that. Like, no. We just thought all this crap up and started writing it, and now you guys all think it's the truth.
We were just bored.
You know, like, and that's all of science right now is, we have all this, well, the Big Bang Theory is what happened. Who said? I read it in a book. Who wrote the book? I don't know, somebody smart. Yeah, I wrote the book, and now I decided that was total crap, so you need to read my new book. It's just, but we present science as though it's dead, as though it's a fixed point in time and space, and that it's the way it is. And I think that's part of the killing curiosity and breaking the boundaries is we have to be willing to say science is a living, breathing thing. Yes, everything we teach you is a theory.
Yeah. Instead of telling them, today in school you're going to learn this, be like, we're going to learn a process or a thought of this, and you might, learn a way to disprove
we're going to learn about what happened.
What happened.
The problem is that you don't get to, I think that happens a lot, but that doesn't happen until you go to college. In high school, they just don't. I just when I was in high school, all of the learning I did on that stuff was self-motivated.
Well, because we're the kind of people
right,
that do
exactly.
that.
Yeah, I was interested in doing that, so I did.
We're at SpaceUp,
but it wasn't until I went to college that it was my professors presenting mathematics and physics and computer science in that light. I remember it was mind-blowing the first time I had a math professor look at me and tell me, yeah, this is still a relatively new field, so you could probably do new work in it. And that just blew my mind at the time because I was so used to having everything already worked out.
Much with games, people want to contribute.
Yeah.
They want to feel like they can do, and there's some great TED Talk with all the cool drawings with it. And people want to have something they can contribute to, something that they can have mastery over, and something they can have autonomy over. Right. And if they don't feel like there's anything they can do in those fields, then they don't even care about it.
Have you discussed fail fast?
No, we talked a little bit about faster, cheaper, better, or faster, cheaper, perfect.
So Pixar's defining ideology is fail fast, right? It's cheaper and more effective to fail fast than it is to bring down a huge monolithic system, right? You could spend a year and a half movie rendering
errors early, basically.
Right.
It's the restaurant model.
Right. So what is the restaurant model?
90% fail within the first year. 80% of the ones that succeed fail in the second year.
Unfortunately, from a dishwashing job.
Yeah, it's attrition, but it produces really good businesses.
Well, fail fast. The way it works is essentially okay. So let's say you have a social media strategy. Right? Like about 2 years ago, I ran I've said this a few times now, the HSF committee social media strategy, right? And so I had a couple of interns and me, and that was it. And not a lot of money to reach the entire United States. And so now you're thinking, okay, what I'm going to have to do these things perfect the first time. One of them was Wikipedia, right? So we took 2 days to develop the most awesome Wikipedia page ever made, and it was perfect. I mean, it was just we dotted all the I's, crossed all the T's. Everything was where it needed to be. We put it up. Within 15 minutes of announcing its availability, it was flagged as spam. Okay, and this is like a national committee. This thing has a charter from the Office of Science and Technology Policy from the White House, and it's been flagged as spam. So how do you argue that? This is supposed to be history, and I can't get an editor with a chip on his shoulder to unflag it. So what you do is you go back and you say, okay, now that we have failed in the first 15 minutes, there's no other option but to succeed, right? We can keep failing, but let's do something. The followers that we have at this point, let's ask them what they would do. So we ask and we say, ladies and gentlemen, here is where our Wikipedia page should be. However, it's broken. We need your help. And then I go back to the team and they're all freaking out. Oh my God, we spent 2 days. This is they're freaking out. What's the committee going to think? And the committee doesn't. I mean, not that they don't care, but their focus is on the report and where it should be, and the research and talking with the public. It's not on the Wikipedia page. My concern is that if that Wikipedia page isn't given a proper baseline from the beginning, who knows what kind of data will end up reporting on this committee. So I said to the group, I tweeted it out, let's walk away from it. We leave. I get there the next morning and there are like 30 or 40 tweets back from the public. Don't worry about it, I got it, I'm an editor, like I know what's gonna, I know what we need to do, and I look at the discussion page, and there's a page, and the Wikipedia page has all the information, but it's not our page. It is not our page at all. This group of like 10 or 15 people who are part of that community, which is a completely different animal. I mean, that was totally, it schooled me, because I thought, oh, it's a thing, right? And you hit edit, and then you're done. Yeah. But it's not. There's a whole subculture. And
don't spend time on your Wikipedia.
There is
pages.
no
It's
one you
changed
should be.
before you hit.
Yeah, exactly.
You should be afraid of those people. They are
right,
intense.
but it's and they are intense, but they're also intensely passionate. So now you have one faction warring with another, saying, "What are you guys doing, taking this page down?" Clearly, I mean, look at my wealth of edits. I'm a knowledgeable source on Wikipedia. Trust me. And that's how it works. That's how it works. So I get back and it's like the team goes, "How did you know?" And I said, "I didn't. I didn't know." But the point here is that you can't be scared of the failure, right? Yeah. It's not going to bring down the whole system. Don't set yourself up for that, because if you do,
and that's happened in aerospace. Do you think that has kept it from being not that model, but the exact opposite? That any failure, no matter how small, is detrimental.
Well, because I think it's so public, right? You lose one shuttle, you lose 4 people.
Well, I'm thinking even on a more, it's very badly.
Well, that's
lost a huge asset.
But that's a big example. But that's a big example.
But what about? It's just as much of a criticality if people, messed up a documentation page.
Right, but
I mean, I think it's a very new idea. Like the wiki model, I think is a very new idea, and on the internet, that's very easy to. The internet is very quick to adapt
because there's
to
so
new
many people
ideas.
that can buy into it.
Right, because there's so
also
many things, but in like organizational structure, I think that a new idea like that takes a lot longer to percolate through an organization.
Because it's so stratified and not like organic.
Think about the beginning of the right stuff, right? Like there is a desert field and there are a bunch of dudes drinking at a bar, right? And these dudes are blowing up into mountains. And that's how it is. And we're going to trust these dudes to somehow get us up there, right? Yeah. And I think you're right. It did kind of change. It did change from this fail fast, which it was failing very fast, to this we cannot fail whatsoever. Ever. And that's what makes us perfect. Well, you know what? Perfect is the enemy of done.
So how do you tell the public that failure is good?
I think at some point you
learn more by failure than you do by accidental success.
What do we have to say?
You communicate it in a positive way. You don't call it failure is good. You say risk. It's healthy risk. You use a different type of word that turns it around. That it makes it, because failure you conjures up
it's
bad
the 99th not
failure
lipo.
and good in the same sense it won't work. So you got to twist it another way.
Failure is like a social construct.
So you learn something.
Yeah. This is a learning experience. This is a growing experience. So something like if somebody would have a kid and say, this is character building. What do you say,
But we're in a society now here in the United States that nobody wants their children to fail. Everybody wins. Everybody gets a trophy. Everybody gets a ribbon, and we play games where we don't keep score.
I got an email saying that they changed the school song because it used to say, and our students are the best, and they took it out, and now it says, all our students are, like literally it changes it so there's no one's the best. They couldn't even tell that they were the best over someone else that wasn't named. And you're just like, are you really kidding me? And I bring it up because it's one of the ride schools. So it's named after astronauts and they have them come and all that. And you're just like, you've got to be kidding me. We can't call ourselves, I'm not putting anyone else down. I'm just calling myself the best at something. I'm like, I just watched the Super Bowl. Are you kidding me, right? It says world champions, Super Bowl 45.
We're driving after excellence. That's
a lot of it's what's acceptable to fail, too. I mean, like the right stuff, they're all test pads in the military. Yeah. But people know that you join the military as a high-risk job. Challenger, when it blew up, we had a teacher on there, a regular person. And then people saw that its shuttle was an airliner, and your mom could be on it tomorrow. And when it blew up, people were like, what's going on. I think a lot of it is failure is kind of a social contract. You have to decide what is acceptable to fail. The other party has to understand what the dangers they're facing, and they have to sign up to it.
The one thing that gets me is that a lot of people, and this is from personal experience. So I ask, okay, so why did you watch that particular one? And they're like, oh, I thought it would be a cool thing to watch. No. Why did you watch it? And then they give you that pause because they're rethinking how to say, because it might blow up, right? As morbid as that is, because it might blow up. Well, when it successfully launches, here we are having a conversation of, oh, this successfully launched, this is how much money this thing that's flying at thousands of miles an hour is worth. That's the conversation that's being had usually when the press covers it, rather than, here are the things that could possibly go wrong, right? If you said it like that, here are the things that could possibly go wrong, and so far haven't, then it's like, oh, but it could. And that sense of danger is still there, right? Why do you go to a NASCAR race, right?
Yeah. For the crashes, man.
For the crashes,
man.
Or hockey game. To see the
right, to see the fights,
right?
Right, so now we're all excited because it might blow up. So that's how you change it, right? If it is a contract and we still want to have that contract and it's part of the social construct to address it the way we address it, we don't have to change it. We just have to shift it a little, right? Just shift it a little bit, enough for it to tingle, enough for it to taste. But that's important.
You're bringing up an interesting thing. I'm just going to jump in here in that there's two things. First, I mean, there's a huge cultural problem where people are looking at space flight and they're looking at the necessity of going to space from the standpoint of dumb things like money or danger, and they forget why we did it in the first place. We didn't do it. We didn't do it so that we could watch something blow up. Kennedy said we did it because we were going to secure new rights for all of mankind, and we were going to make fundamental progress for all of mankind. And fact is, you have a bunch of people who think money is the measure of human rights. So that's a line that's going out into the culture, which is actually not true. It's just popular opinion.
That's actually changing with slightly over time. Poor countries are becoming more democratic, as we've seen in the last couple of weeks, and it doesn't have to be. You don't have to be rich to be free anymore.
One of the other problems is the idea that where democracy is the idea that everyone's opinion matters, but everyone's opinion is not necessarily the truth.
Right.
Right. So in a republic, for example, it's what's true that matters, and
everybody's opinion is listened to.
Yeah. Right. You get the democratic right to participate in the discussion.
But you don't have the right to be right. If you're right, you're right.
If you're right, you're right. Exactly. And if you're the best, you're the best. And if you're not the best, you're not the best.
But
you gotta be humble in that sense.
That's an attitude. That's like a very scientific attitude. And
True.
I grew up. My dad's a scientist. I grew up around them. I understand that culturally. But a lot of my friends are like drama people, and that's a much more foreign concept to people who aren't really surrounded by science all the time.
There is no right answer.
Right, yeah. I mean, in art, there is no right answer.
Yeah, there's no wrong
And so
answer.
in more artistic communities, that's a more difficult concept for them to naturally come to. The idea of a meritocracy.
I know they want to talk about things like feelings. How do you feel about that?
I'm not saying it's not like that's a less valid way of thinking, but it's a problem that you can have it's easy for us to see this because we're science nerds.
What you're talking about, going back to this here, what will sustain interest? part of what we're saying is, yeah, we can interest the young people who grow up with somebody with science in the background, not as much around people who don't like to, talk about feelings. 'Cause, oh my God, somebody might laugh or cry. But we got to realize that there are other people who need to sustain interest within what NASA does. Once we do get a unified, hey, here's what our missions are, here's how it's helping out everybody else, we got to be able to communicate that to all the different types of people. We can communicate it to, type A scientific personalities like ourselves, but how do you get to the artists? How do you get to the drama people? How do you get it to the school teachers? How do you get to a wide range of things? And I think that's something we're lacking. And that's why Hubble was awesome, because everybody could dig a cool picture.
Yeah. This is a result of Hubble.
See, everybody could dig a cool picture. And that's why everybody loves Hubble, because you don't have to be a really smart, intelligent person to appreciate Hubble. But then when we see other things and you got really smart people talking, it's very easy to be intimidated.
Pictures speak louder than words. If in the absence of pictures, all you have is words coming out of the mouths of people who can't speak normal people language.
So we need to make sure our ambassadors are the correctly selected ones to talk to the right people about what we do in the correct forms.
Yeah, I wonder how many people share my point of view. Maybe as a techie, but or maybe just because I worked around it. But I think the space shuttle as a vehicle, especially on the launch pad and launching, is quite beautiful.
Yeah, no,
it's
not every American.
Well, and on a more instinctual level, like giant rockets are really awesome. They shoot fire out of one hand and they fly.
But you're bringing up this awesome point, which is the sense of wonder.
Yeah.
If you want to really get someone impassioned about their relationship to the universe, you have to really talk about it from that standpoint.
Yes.
Look at Kraft Erica. I mean, the guy was the pioneer, and if you read his writings, my God, he was so filled with inspiration that it exuded from every word. So there was real poetry in his presentations, even though he's talking about going to Mars, which is something we've been talking about since, Kepler. I mean, this is something it's there that when you are struck with the measure of your own magnitude in relation to the universe, and you're growing your sense of self in relation to something that verges on the infinite, you're just going to be caught in that. And that's really, I think, because, did people say we have to stop funding airplanes when the first airplane crashed? It was probably as much of a shock to people then because they'd never flown before. But we were driven by it because you said, no, this is something that we're going to do. And because the discussion in the media is always organized around dumb things, and they don't address the sense of wonder.
And that's when people ask me what I do for my job. It doesn't matter if it's a kid or an adult or relatives. I mean, if it's somebody like, down the hall, then yeah, that's, it's a technical discussion. But somebody that I don't know, it's like, have you ever watched, like TV with the space shuttle and you see the Earth at night when the crew's asleep, you see those beautiful views of the Earth, and you're like, yeah, I'm like, I control those cameras when the crew's asleep. That's the cool part about my job. That's how I tell them what my job is. Like, oh wow, I'm like, yeah, I got to see, I've seen the whole world at 200 nautical miles up. It was pretty darn cool. And that starts that discussion because all those pictures that are generated of like the pretty blue marble, it's like, wait, that person does that? And then you got to make sure whenever you have that dialogue with somebody, you highlight that really cool aspect of whatever your job does that sustains interest. And that's why we're all really ambassadors. It's not just, NASA Select or NASA TV putting out less crappy programming. We are all the ambassadors. We got to make sure when we're communicating to everybody else, it's not like, well, I do this, so, and it's blah, blah, blah. I hate it when I hear people start using, like, big acronyms and, like, I'm special. It's like, no, you're damn lucky you got that job.
Right.
And you should share that enthusiasm and spark that wonder.
I got to experience what you do one time. I was working in the mission evaluation room, which is sub to the mission control room, and we wanted to see something in the payload bay one time. The astronauts would all sleep and walk down, and
Yep.
this person's like, "Oh yeah, I can show you that," and they push a button,
Yep.
and then you see the camera move, and it's just like, "You are awesome." That was awesome.
Well,
Going
you want to
back,
see it again?
yeah. Going back to this a little bit, though, I think one thing that maybe that could be tapped is also the big movement towards open source software. I mean, it's like the wiki groups. I mean, those guys. I mean, by all rights, there shouldn't be like this software that's for free that like does what you want it to do, and all these people are so intent on making this thing perfect, and there's no money income or anything, but these people just know it so well. Like if you were to go like what Wayne's suggesting and do an open source hardware, do like an open source spacecraft avionics.
They're
project.
actually doing that out at Ames.
Really?
Yeah, they've got an open source software project called Cosmos Code, and it's an open source spacecraft control system software, and they're working on a open source body design for spacecraft, which could be, you know, like you put rocket on the bottom, it's a lander. You put wheels on the bottom, it's a rover. You put an extra solar panel on the bottom, it's an orbiter. And they're actually building that out.
Components and all that.
Yeah, and Odyssey Moon, I think, is actually contracting with
That
Ames to
is
use
Xbox
one of
game,
theirs.
Everybody will love it.
So to try to create that common bus where you can just plug pieces into it and say, just like people are doing now with the DIY revolution, where you can buy components off the internet and stick them all together and, you know, well, I made a robot to turn off the lights because I hate doing that. You know? 10 years ago, you would have had to build all those things. Well, now they've open sourced it to where you can do it. So that is happening.
So passionate about that. I mean, get involved in those projects, and it's just unbelievable. And if you got something like that, where I mean, if that became the standard, that makes things so much easier as far as like Honeywell goes. Like, okay, we're gonna take this open source code, but we're going to add our own little things to it, and that makes it unique to there. But
yeah,
I mean,
they can patent
you've
that.
saved so many development hours on this. I mean, if somebody was to sit down and count how many avionics software have been written for all the airplanes in the world, I think about how much time could have been consolidated just going to an open source.
And open source, if you had it that way, it reminds me of we probably had on a couple of missions back. I'm looking at you, if you remember what number it is. Where we ran our sims, we had our simulations, and everything was going fine. They updated the software maintenance computer to a new operational whatever. So they updated the software. And then when we got on orbit, and then the cable dish comes out, it goes through its little self-test. Okay, great. Wait, it's not working. Wait, 131. That's it. Was it one that? No, that one had just whacked out. It was like a couple before. Yeah, that's a whole other issue. That was spit on a transistor, killed our antenna. I'm serious. That's what the ref found out. Yeah. But the dish won't work in one of our payload boxes. It wouldn't connect to that same computer. So the whole time we're sitting there going, what's going on? What's going on? Well, a week or two into the flight, we found out the software that was uploaded on board had like an asterisk in the wrong place, or one of those little nifty symbols that does something special. It was in the wrong place. Well, in our simulation, we had that software loaded and running, but the way the boxes interacted, it kind of said, okay, just for ease of the 1980s technology, we're going to skip out all this, and when you hit this command, it's going to automatically do these functions. So it never got tested out, even though we went through all these sims and everything else. Yeah, that has rolled. So
that's
from
called
that
the simulation
experience,
program.
again, 1980s, you don't have the money to fund the SMS, the buildings and upkeep. I mean, we say we have anomaly reports that's affecting crew training. They're like, we don't have the money to fix it. Sorry, you got to work around it. We were told that over and over and over and over again. But if you could have some open source software where you could run these things through in a practical manner that didn't take away from crew training, that would have avoided a lot of heartache for that mission, because that affected inspections, that affected OCA operations with crew email. How are we going to do all this? That affected so much.
Okay, I love that idea, except now I'm thinking, I think I used to get paid doing that kind of thing. Now that's being taken away.
I mean, if you had if you had a say at home type of cluster technology, it wouldn't have to be widely distributed. It could be distributed amongst all your employees, and be like, okay, when you're not playing WoW or doing work at home, then use this as your screensaver. It'll compile our code for work. It'll do your work for you. You will be technically getting paid to not use your computer.
Or just use the computers in the office when they're not open source.
Well, I was going to point out that most open source projects are worked on and maintained by people who are paid.
Right.
I mean, and companies will pay to have people, I know
Taking
Google
someone's
does
job
this.
away when
You
you
write
do
a
that.
general open source.
I know Google
because
does
you really
this.
want it to be as general as possible, and this company comes in and goes, okay, this is great, but we need it to do this extra little
Right.
function.
That's how.
Find a way to make
Yeah,
money off it.
You make money off of the
Paying
1%
for
of
software
users.
itself.
That is the 1% model.
Right.
Literally.
So in a
1% of
sense,
your
it would
users
be
will make
open,
it. Yeah.
and you would still have your job working on it. It's just that it would be open so that if someone else could take a look at it and go, hey, send your mail going, hey, I see that there's this problem, I've written this fix. And then you can fold it in.
There's a page on Drupal.org. Drupal is a content management system for websites. So the White House decided to use this open source software to put up whitehouse.gov. There is a very cool page on the actual software site, Drupal, that says, here's a list of all the modifications made by the White House and the content that they contributed back to the source. And it was like 19 different modules that were developed from scratch that needed to be developed for whitehouse.gov to exist, but that were contributed right back. So they're, secure identification, encryption, whatever was necessary for the .gov site to exist, but was put right back out so anybody could incorporate it.
Yeah. Well, but then if you have open source, they give you, isn't there a risk there that somebody might want to cause mischief?
They might try to exploit it.
And you hear that a lot, but it turns out to not happen that much because one, security through obfuscation is a terrible way to vet security. It just doesn't work. And two, usually, I mean, it's like Wikipedia. It's like why Wikipedia pages don't get permanently vandalized. Because there's someone watching who immediately switches it back. And it's the same thing. You have the changelog, you can see, and presumably the people who work on the project the most will recognize the good from the bad.
And it's still wouldn't be open source just on the general web. It would be more like, oh, we have this little aerospace community, and you come and sign in, and we kind of bet you a little.
5 passwords.
You have general passwords and a closed
Here's how it works really well is that
internet cafe.
What you restrict is the ability to commit changes to the main source. So anybody can take it. Anybody can write whatever they want, but it doesn't end up in the main code unless someone
My issues I've always had of using anything open source is one, being able to, on a corporate level, prove that you can own it. Which you're like, that sounds a lot easier than it is. You're like, it's open source, and legal comes and sends you a document that says you have to prove to me that we are allowed to use and modify this, which normally means you have to pay for it anyway.
Usually that comes with a license.
Right, so you need a license, you have to pay for it.
But, well, actually, I mean, it depends on the license used.
And like on open source stuff, we were finding the issue of if they made a policy, just no technical data, or anything that would hold technical data, because we were worried about ITAR restrictions. We were just like, essentially, if anyone outside the US looked at it, we were liable.
Wow.
All right, I know the city's going to come in like 2 minutes and tell us all to get out of here because this building needs to, all the people need to take a break and vacuum all our crumbs. But don't stop talking. And in fact, go ahead and write sticky notes and get them ready for tomorrow's board.
And. Wiki.SpaceUpHouston.org.
Put the ideas down.
Okay. Yeah.
So when are we canceling NASA, what I kept coming back to was the way that we're framing the conversation. And I remember there was an awesome TEDx talk. Does everybody know TED Talks? I'm just going to assume that's a yes. Yeah. There was a TEDx talk, and the guy was describing how, I was just telling them right now.
Dude, wait.
Just called it.
Dude, 2.5 hours. I'm just saying. If you want to continue,
Did I not say
out.
He walked out of the
Did I not say
I know, he was chatting with me out there.
I gave the warning this morning.
I know he is in the middle of giving closing remarks. However, I have closing remarks in the main hall and raffle prizes to give away, so I think I'm a little more important. So anyway, as soon as Tim releases, you join me.
We'll be 2 seconds. So the guy did a really awesome talk, and it was called "How Great Leaders Inspire Action." And what he said was exactly what you went to before. They talk about the why we do something, then how we do that, and what that manifests itself as in the physical world. So Apple says we make life easy by making products that are beautiful and functional, like this iPhone you should buy. They don't start off saying, buy this iPhone because it's really functional, because we like to make things that work. They start off at the beginning and say, we make products that work. NASA makes life on Earth worth living. NASA makes life on Earth work better. You know, like, what is it that NASA does? NASA provides a conduit for human exploration of the universe around us. That, you know, I mean, NASA's had a vision statement like that before.
Yeah.
NASA explores space to improve life on Earth. And we don't say that part very much. We say we have a rocket with 4.3 million pounds of thrust on takeoff, and it's 422 feet tall, and it's going to go to the moon in 2.2 days. And everybody goes, I don't care about your hardware because I don't understand why you're doing it. And I think if we start off behind all that with, we explore space to improve life on Earth in every single person's everyday life. How we do that is by developing rockets, by developing satellites, and by doing basic research into how the universe works. And what that means is we need to develop launch vehicles, specific satellite systems, and chemical processes that facilitate those missions. People would be behind us. And that's what we're missing, is the why we're doing it. We get too bogged down in the technical, and we don't really go explain what NASA is there for on a internal level first and work out to that. So I'm just go watch the TED Talk. It's amazing.
Politicians get bogged down in talking about and arguing about solutions instead of coming to a consensus on what the problem is.
It's easier to talk about solutions than it is to talk about what the root. I mean, like we did. We could talk forever. Me.
I was just checking.
Throw your cans in the can thing. I know, that's why I'm telling you about it now in a very loud voice.
Back here.
Because I knew it wasn't just going to be you.
It's a nice bin. And I got freaked out, so I called KSC to pull the shuttle back.
Good Lord, people, we only have like 8 planets left now.
We're
We're losing them at an alarming rate. We can't keep going through them like this.